She doesn't hate you. She just never respected you to begin with. When it comes to mind games, few do it with the cold precision of a seasoned manipulator. And yes, that includes women. But what if I told you that the same cunning tactics used in modern relationships were already written down centuries ago by one of history's most ruthless thinkers? In this video, we dive deep into 3 hours of female mind game tactics through the lens of Niccolo Machiavelli. You'll see how his brutal, strategic insights into power, control, and perception mirror the psychological chessboard many of us find ourselves on today. If this is your first time on the channel, hit subscribe and drop a comment below. Which philosopher should we uncover next? Withhold affection to create dependency. This tactic plays on one of the most fundamental human needs, the need for connection, warmth, and approval. Machiavelli famously said, "It is better to be feared than loved, if you cannot be both." In the context of relationships, this translates to maintaining control by keeping emotional rewards scarce and conditional. Affection, whether verbal praise, physical closeness, or emotional validation, is a form of currency. When it is abundant, it loses strategic value. But when affection is unpredictable, inconsistent, and doled out only when certain behaviors are met, it becomes addictive. This tactic leverages the psychological principle of intermittent reinforcement, the same principle that makes slot machines so hard to walk away from. By intentionally withholding affection, the manipulator trains their partner to chase the emotional high. The affection becomes a reward that must be earned, not a baseline of love. This changes the power structure. The recipient starts acting out of fear of losing the only emotional validation they're getting. The manipulator now controls the temperature of the relationship. This tactic works especially well when it follows a period of intense bonding or love bombing. The sudden shift from warmth to coldness causes confusion and anxiety, which paradoxically increases the emotional attachment. It's not just a mind game, it's neurochemical warfare. Dopamine spikes during connection are followed by cortisol spikes during withdrawal. The body itself starts craving resolution, and the mind becomes obsessed with figuring out how to get things back to normal. The person on the receiving end may start overanalyzing their every move. Did I say something wrong? Did I not show enough appreciation? Their world slowly begins to orbit around the emotional state of the one withholding affection. They'll apologize even when they're not at fault. They'll become more giving, more forgiving, more desperate. And that's when the manipulator has achieved their goal: complete dependency. Use tears to end arguments and redirect blame. Tears are not always signs of vulnerability. Sometimes they are weapons. In Machiavellian terms, this tactic is about controlling the emotional battlefield. It short-circuits logic and morality by invoking guilt and empathy, especially in men who are wired, socially and biologically, to respond protectively to crying. Imagine a heated confrontation where one party is articulating grievances. Facts are laid out, emotions are controlled. The argument is progressing toward accountability. Then, tears. Suddenly, the mood shifts. The focus moves from resolution to comfort. The person crying has successfully reversed roles, from the accused to the victim. This tactic is effective because it taps into ancient social programming. Throughout history, crying has signaled distress, submission, and the need for protection. But Machiavellian use of tears is calculated, not spontaneous. It's the conscious choice to turn an argument into an emotional minefield. The tears don't say, "I'm hurt." They say, "If you keep pressing me, you're cruel." As a result, the original point is lost. The argument stops. The person who brought up the issue often ends up apologizing. Blame is redirected. Accountability is erased. But there's a second layer. Tears also build a narrative. They imply that the person crying is the one emotionally invested, the one suffering. Over time, this can reshape how others, including outsiders, view the relationship. If one person is always upset and the other always frustrated, the emotional optics paint a powerful picture of imbalance, regardless of truth. This manipulation is often subtle and hard to call out without looking heartless. If someone says you're crying just to avoid the issue, they risk seeming cold and accusatory, further playing into the narrative the tears are designed to construct. In Machiavellian terms, the tears are the smokescreen. Behind them, the real strategy is always power retention, narrative control, and avoiding consequences. Shift moods unpredictably to keep you guessing. This tactic is straight from the heart of divide-and-conquer psychology. When someone's emotional state shifts unpredictably, from warmth to coldness, from enthusiasm to detachment, they create a psychological instability that keeps others off balance. And in an unsteady environment, the one who controls the turbulence controls the terms of the relationship. Machiavelli emphasized unpredictability as a tool of political dominance. In The Prince, he observed that rulers must never be too consistent. Predictability invites planning. A predictable opponent can be outmaneuvered, but an unpredictable one must always be watched and feared. In relationships, emotional inconsistency functions the same way. You never know what version of the person you're going to get. Are they going to laugh with you or lash out? Will they greet you with warmth or distance? Over time, this uncertainty turns into emotional surveillance. You begin to monitor everything: your words, your tone, your actions. You become hyper-aware, cautious, and deeply insecure. You're not living freely. You're living reactively. This tactic also reshapes the power dynamic. The manipulator becomes the emotional center of gravity. The partner becomes the one constantly adjusting, over-apologizing, trying to decode signals. This guessing game creates exhaustion, and in that exhaustion, critical thinking fades. Logic is replaced with emotional coping, and that's when control takes root. It also creates an illusion of complexity. If someone is hot and cold, we assume depth. We interpret inconsistency as inner turmoil, not manipulation. She's complicated. She's got trauma. We rationalize what's actually just a control tactic. The mystery becomes romanticized, even spiritualized. What's most devious about this strategy is how it conditions others to seek approval. When the manipulator does show warmth, it feels like a breakthrough, like you've finally done something right, like you've earned a reward. But that approval was never earned. It was always given or withheld for strategic reasons. Just like a skilled ruler would destabilize neighboring factions to maintain dominance, an emotionally inconsistent partner destabilizes the relationship to retain psychological power. It's not chaos for its own sake. It's designed to keep the other person focused, dependent, and always seeking resolution that never fully arrives. Fake vulnerability to appear less threatening. One of the most manipulative yet subtle tactics often used in power dynamics, especially in emotional and romantic contexts, is the calculated display of vulnerability. This isn't the authentic kind that builds intimacy. No, this is strategic. It's used to lower your defenses, soften your judgment, and ultimately manipulate your behavior without you realizing you're being played. Machiavelli never spoke directly of romantic games in the modern sense, but his teachings in The Prince are startlingly aligned with this concept. He advised rulers to appear merciful, faithful, humane, sincere, and religious, but only appear so. These traits, he argued, made a ruler seem relatable and trustworthy, which in turn made people easier to manage and control. The tactic of faking vulnerability is exactly that, performative relatability. In the female version of this tactic, It may look like confiding early in the relationship with personal traumas or insecurities. At first glance, it feels raw, open, and sincere, but in reality, it's a premeditated move to lower your guard. Why? Because once you see someone as fragile or emotionally damaged, you're less likely to question their motives or push back against their behavior. They position themselves not as a threat, but as someone you must protect. This disarms you. You're no longer evaluating them based on logic or behavior. Instead, you're responding with empathy, often even guilt. And therein lies the power of the tactic. It transfers the emotional labor and responsibility onto you. People over 40 know this move well, whether from dating, marriages, or even workplace politics. The soft-spoken colleague who always seems overwhelmed and seeks help, not because she can't do the task, but because she knows you'll do it better or faster. The partner who constantly talks about being damaged, so any criticism feels like you're kicking a wounded puppy. This isn't real vulnerability. It's weaponized softness. A Machiavellian mind sees the value in perception. When someone perceives you as harmless, they give more. When they see you as broken, they tolerate more. It's about controlling outcomes by disarming resistance without lifting a finger. The moment you believe someone needs protecting, your mind stops suspecting them of strategic behavior. That's the brilliance and the danger of faked vulnerability. Feign insecurity to bait validation. Insecurity, when real, is a deeply personal and often debilitating feeling. But when it's feigned, when someone pretends to feel unsure, unworthy, or jealous, it becomes a powerful manipulative tactic. It draws attention, draws energy, and most importantly, draws validation. And validation is control, plain and simple. Machiavelli was obsessed with how rulers could maintain power by appearing to need their people while secretly manipulating them. Pretended weakness, he taught, could stir loyalty and make others work harder to please or protect the ruler. This same strategy plays out today in emotional mind games, especially in romantic relationships, where feigned insecurity is used to trap someone into a feedback loop of constant reassurance. A woman using this strategy might say things like, "I don't know why you're with me," or "You probably find other women more attractive." These phrases on the surface appear self-deprecating, but if you take the bait, and most people do, you rush to reassure. "No, you're beautiful. I only want you. You're the best thing in my life." That's the goal, not honesty, but control over your emotional responses. And here's the kicker. This tactic isn't about boosting self-esteem. It's about training you to provide emotional supply on command. You're not building her up, you're becoming predictable. A well-timed dose of insecurity means you'll say exactly what she needs to hear when she needs to hear it. It's operant conditioning in a cocktail dress. Worse still, this dynamic is often cloaked in romantic language. She just needs a little reassurance. She's been hurt before. But if this need never stabilizes, if the insecurities seem endless or cyclical, what you're seeing isn't healing, it's harvesting. Your words, your emotional availability, your time, all of it becomes a renewable resource to her. And every time you validate, you're investing further. The most dangerous part is how normalized this behavior becomes. Men in long-term relationships often report feeling emotionally drained, but can't pinpoint why. This is the reason: constantly being on emotional guard duty, constantly trying to prove yourself. It creates a power imbalance where she is the fragile one, and you're the one always needing to be enough. From a Machiavellian point of view, feigning insecurity is a mask. It hides the true intention of maintaining control. And if you're always busy lifting her up, you won't notice how low you've been pushed. Use silence as a punishment. Silence is often misunderstood. People see it as passive, as absence. But in the realm of emotional manipulation, silence is not just a gap in noise. It is a weapon, one of the most powerful weapons in the arsenal of psychological tactics. And it's one Machiavelli himself would have admired because it punishes without direct confrontation, instills fear without raising a voice, and asserts control without lifting a hand. When someone suddenly goes silent, especially after a conflict or disagreement, it creates a vacuum. That vacuum fills with your thoughts, your anxiety, your questions. Did I say something wrong? Is she angry? Is she gone for good? You begin to mentally spiral, replaying everything that happened, often blaming yourself. This is where silence gains its power. It forces you to do the emotional labor. She doesn't have to argue or explain. Her silence makes you reach out, you apologize, you try harder. Machiavelli wrote that it is better to be feared than loved, if one cannot be both. Silence achieves this delicate balance. It doesn't require aggression, yet it induces fear. Fear of abandonment, fear of emotional loss, fear of having failed. In relationships, this can be a recurring cycle. A woman might withdraw communication after minor disagreements, not to cool off, but to punish. The more you chase, the more power she gains. This tactic thrives on emotional dependency. If you're invested, her silence is unbearable. And that's the point. It conditions you. You begin avoiding conflict, even suppressing your own needs just to avoid triggering that cold shoulder again. Over time, your voice disappears. And hers doesn't need to rise because the threat of silence is enough. This isn't healthy detachment. This is manipulative withdrawal. It teaches you that love and peace are conditional, that speaking up risks exile, that her attention is a prize you have to earn over and over again. Older men, particularly those in long-term relationships or divorces, know this game well. It's not yelling that breaks a man, it's being iced out emotionally. The silent treatment makes you feel like a stranger in your own life. It's not just communication that's cut off, it's intimacy, connection, and belonging. Machiavelli would have understood this perfectly. He knew that fear creates obedience. And silence, when used with precision, is far more terrifying than any word shouted in anger. Weaponize "I'm fine" as emotional landmines. Few phrases are more loaded, more deceptively simple than "I'm fine." On the surface, it's an innocent statement, two words that suggest calm, control, and self-containment. But underneath, it's a psychological snare, a soft-voiced trap laid in the middle of emotional terrain. When used strategically, "I'm fine" becomes a landmine. You don't know it's there until you've already stepped on it. In Machiavellian terms, this is a masterclass in ambiguity and plausible deniability. Machiavelli famously argued that power lies not in brute force, but in perception. Control the perception, and you control the battlefield. "I'm fine" functions exactly this way. It invites the other person to either ignore it and be punished for doing so, or poke deeper into it and fall right into the emotional crosshairs. No matter what move they make, you stay in control. This tactic hinges on one key principle: never express direct vulnerability. Instead, create emotional unease without fully showing your hand. "I'm fine" makes the other party feel unsure, even paranoid. It makes them question, did I miss something? Is she upset? Is this about me? That uncertainty compels them to overcorrect, to chase, to try and fix what they're not sure is even broken. It creates imbalance, which Machiavelli taught was the foundation of manipulation. Keep your opponent off balance, and you'll keep the upper hand. Think about how often this tactic works in long-term relationships. A husband comes home from work, senses something's off, and asks his wife if everything's okay. "I'm fine," she says. But her tone is flat, her eyes avoid his, her body language says otherwise. He now carries the emotional burden. He's left to stew, replay recent conversations, offer gestures of affection or apology, not knowing what the real issue is, or if there even is one. And here's the brilliance. If he pushes too hard, she can claim he's overreacting. If he doesn't push at all, she can accuse him of not caring. It's not an argument. It's a psychological gridlock where one party holds all the leverage. This isn't just passive aggression. It's weaponized silence. It draws from Machiavellian tactics of veiled threats and invisible pressure. And it's devastatingly effective because it doesn't give the other person anything to grab onto. There's no open conflict to address, only lingering, invisible tension. The result? Emotional dominance. You become the center of their mental energy. They orbit your emotional state. You occupy their thoughts without ever needing to raise your voice. That's power, the Machiavellian kind. Start fights before your big moments to stay the focus. Timing isn't just everything in strategy, it is the strategy. And in relationships, few moves are more tactically precise than triggering conflict just before a partner's high-stakes moment. A big work event, a family milestone, an important decision. This tactic might sound cruel, and it is, but cruelty, when disguised as vulnerability, becomes almost invisible. Starting a fight before a partner's big moment accomplishes several powerful objectives at once. First, it divides their focus. They're forced to perform or appear composed in public while mentally weighed down by emotional chaos at home. Second, it redirects attention. Even as they try to shine in their moment, part of their energy remains looped back to you. And third, it rewrites the narrative. Instead of their big day being their win, it becomes entangled with you. Machiavelli wrote extensively about how rulers should keep subjects occupied with external dangers to consolidate control. A partner on edge, preoccupied by an unresolved argument, is more likely to comply, more likely to return seeking resolution, handing you both emotional leverage and the power of the last word. Here's how it works in real time. Imagine your partner is preparing for an important presentation. The night before, you bring up a seemingly minor issue, something they said weeks ago that bothered you. You don't explode. You just plant a seed of discontent. It's enough to create tension, enough to stir emotional waters without overtly sabotaging. The next day, even as they present, that issue lingers. It fogs their mind. They're thinking of you, wondering if you're still upset, if they'll come home to a Cold War. And if they perform poorly or seem distant during their big moment, that's where the Machiavellian advantage sharpens. Now they question whether their struggle was internal or because of you. Guilt creeps in. Emotional dependency deepens. You've turned their success into an extension of your presence. Even in their highest moments, they're not alone. They're entangled with your shadow. This tactic also ensures that if they do succeed, they'll come back seeking your validation. Why? Because you were the last unresolved variable in their emotional field. They crave your peace as part of their reward. You become the final authority, even if you had nothing to do with the actual success. It's important to note, this isn't about destroying others. It's about keeping emotional leverage. In the game of power, visibility equals influence. If someone has a moment to shine without you being part of it, their ego may grow independent of your approval. But if you attach a string of tension to their success, it keeps them tethered. You stay in orbit. In Machiavellian terms, it's not sabotage. It's strategic disruption, controlled chaos with emotional returns. Apologize without changing behavior. An apology is supposed to be a contract, an acknowledgement of wrongdoing, and a pledge to change. But for the tactician, it's a performance. And when done right, it's an act of manipulation disguised as humility. Machiavelli understood that perception is more valuable than truth. To appear remorseful without being remorseful is one of the oldest tricks in the power playbook. Why? Because apologies calm storms. They reset emotional tension. They reopen the gates of goodwill, temporarily. And if you offer them just convincingly enough, people will accept them even if nothing changes. Apologizing without changing behavior keeps you in control because it creates a loop of emotional reset without personal sacrifice. You say you're sorry. The other party softens. But you do it again and again. Over time, the apology becomes your shield. The other person is trained to expect the words, but not the change. And here's the dark truth. They often stay anyway. This tactic thrives in long-term emotional dynamics. A wife who always apologizes for crossing a line, only to do it again. A partner who says, "I didn't mean to hurt you," but repeats the same act of neglect or disrespect. Why is this tolerated? Because the apology feeds a hope that next time will be different. That hope is emotional bait, and it works best when paired with vulnerability, affection, or tears. It's also a domination strategy masked as submission. You disarm the other person by conceding just enough to seem accountable. But the real goal isn't reconciliation. It's stalling consequence. Machiavelli would call this buying time with flattery, a method rulers use to delay uprisings or discontent without changing policy. You tell people what they want to hear while continuing what benefits you. Even more cunning? Reframe your repeat behavior as a personal struggle. Say things like, "I know I need to be better," or "I'm really trying." These phrases shift the focus from your partner's unmet needs to your supposed internal battle. They now become patient, supportive, invested in your improvement. Meanwhile, nothing changes. Eventually, if they try to call out the pattern, you can accuse them of lacking compassion. "You said you forgave me," you'll say, or "I'm trying, but it's hard when you don't believe in me." Now they become the aggressor. You've reversed roles without lifting a finger. This tactic is brutal because it capitalizes on emotional goodwill. The other person wants to believe in you, so you give them the script, but never the resolution. You keep them hoping, doubting, questioning, and that's the Machiavellian core. Domination through illusion. You've mastered control not by fear or force, but by stringing together emotional IOUs that never get repaid. Play damsel to awaken your protector instincts. There's a reason the damsel in distress trope has endured through centuries of storytelling. It taps into a fundamental psychological trigger, especially in men, the need to protect, to feel useful, and to be a hero in someone else's narrative. When a woman presents herself as vulnerable, lost, misunderstood, emotionally hurt, or in need of guidance, she doesn't always do this from a place of helplessness. More often than not, it's calculated. She's not incapable. She's awakening something deep inside of you, your desire to step up, fix, support, and ultimately be needed. This isn't always malicious. It can even be unconscious, but it's a tactic nonetheless, and one Machiavelli would have admired for its subtle power. Niccolo Machiavelli taught that appearances often matter more than truth. "Everyone sees what you appear to be," he wrote. "Few experience what you really are." A woman who presents herself as soft, delicate, or in crisis might be anything but. Yet if that appearance stirs you to act, it's as effective as any sword or threat. This method works especially well on men who see themselves as protectors or providers. If you're a man in your 40s, 50s, or 60s, successful, emotionally grounded, and proud of your ability to care for others, you're a prime target. not because you're weak, but because your strength includes compassion. Now think about how this tactic unfolds. You meet a woman who seems to carry emotional scars. She tells you how her last relationship left her broken. She hints at trauma, an ex who betrayed her, friends who abandoned her, family who never understood her. Your instinct kicks in. She deserves better. You want to show her not all men are the same. You want to lift her up. And that's exactly the hook. When you begin to invest emotionally, thinking you're helping her heal, she's actually pulling you deeper into her frame. You begin to justify, to accommodate, to protect. You feel noble, but in doing so, you start sacrificing your objectivity. You start tolerating things you wouldn't normally accept, all under the illusion that she just needs someone to believe in her. This is Machiavellian in nature because it manipulates your strength and flips it into her leverage. Like the prince who uses mercy to build loyalty, the damsel leverages your care to build control. Now, not every woman using this tactic is trying to harm you. Some are genuinely hurt, but intent doesn't change the dynamic. It only masks it better. Once you're locked into the role of her savior, the game shifts. You'll start to fear upsetting her, walking on eggshells around her emotions and overextending to keep her safe, because you've invested in the image you bought into. Recognize this. If a woman constantly plays the victim, makes you feel like only you can rescue her, and builds your role as her protector, she may be shaping your behavior more than you realize. Ask yourself, is she really weak, or is she wielding weakness like a weapon? Give mixed signals to destabilize you. Mixed signals are not a sign of confusion, they're a form of control. When a woman is hot one day and cold the next, when she seems deeply interested one moment and distant the next, what she's doing is creating an imbalance in your emotional state. She is making you chase clarity, not love. And the moment you start seeking clarity, you've entered her frame. This isn't accidental. It's strategic. Machiavelli emphasized the importance of unpredictability. In politics and warfare, keeping your opponent unsure of your next move makes them hesitant, reactive, and easier to dominate. A wise ruler, he said, should not keep faith when by doing so it would be against his interest. Translated into modern dynamics, sometimes not showing your cards is the key to control. When a woman gives you mixed signals, she's subtly putting you on a leash. You become emotionally hooked, not because of how much she gives, but because of how little she gives after giving just enough. She might initiate deep conversations, share vulnerability, flirt intensely, then go cold for a day. No explanation, no closure, just silence. This triggers the dopamine loop in your brain, similar to how gambling works. You keep pulling the slot machine lever because it sometimes pays out, and when it does, it feels amazing. You ignore the losses and chase the next win. She becomes the casino. You become the addict. From a Machiavellian point of view, this keeps you reactive. You're constantly trying to interpret her behavior, adjust your own, and get back to that moment when things felt certain. You start questioning yourself. Did I do something wrong? Is she losing interest? Should I try harder? This psychological fog is exactly what she wants, because clarity empowers you, but confusion empowers her. The most dangerous aspect of this tactic is how it gets you to betray your own instincts. You start accepting crumbs. You tolerate ambiguity. You lower your standards because you remember how it felt when she was sweet, engaging, and connected. That memory becomes a kind of emotional blackmail. You stick around, not because it's good now, but because it was good once, and might be again. Older men, especially those who have dealt with long-term relationships or divorces, often get hit hardest by this. You've built lives on logic, stability, and commitment. When someone disturbs that with erratic behavior, you try to fix it. But this is a game not meant to be solved. It's meant to trap. The cure is awareness. If you notice a pattern of intense connection followed by emotional withdrawal, repeated again and again, you're not crazy. You're being played. And the most Machiavellian move you can make in return? Stop reacting. Pull away, just as you're getting close. Few tactics are as powerful or as emotionally devastating as the strategic withdrawal right when you're getting close. You open up. You begin to trust. Maybe for the first time in years, you let your guard down. The connection is deep. The chemistry is real. The moments feel intimate. Then, out of nowhere, she pulls away. Emotionally, physically. She becomes distant, distracted, or suddenly too busy. No fight, no closure, just an emotional vanishing act. This isn't always fear of intimacy. Often, it's about power. Machiavelli warned that once someone depends on you emotionally, you control the terms of the relationship. A woman who pulls away just as things become real isn't confused. She's measuring your reaction. She wants to see how much control she's gained, how deeply you've been hooked, and whether you'll chase her. This tactic works because it feels personal. You assume you did something wrong. You feel rejected, confused, and vulnerable. And when those feelings overwhelm you, what do? You reach out. You ask what's wrong. You apologize, sometimes without knowing what for. You try harder. You become the one trying to win her back. And there it is, the shift. The emotional high she gave you wasn't a promise. It was bait. Her withdrawal activates your attachment system. You start giving more, offering more, committing more, just to restore what felt real. This tactic is especially damaging for mature men. By 40 or 50, you've likely experienced loss, maybe a divorce, the end of a long relationship, or deep betrayal. You value connection not as a game, but as a rare and meaningful bond. When that bond is suddenly disrupted, it doesn't just hurt, it destabilizes your sense of judgment. From a Machiavellian perspective, this is a masterstroke. By making herself scarce after giving you something valuable, whether it's affection, time, or vulnerability, she increases her perceived value. Scarcity breeds desire. People want what they can't have. And if she knows how to use this scarcity at just the right moment, she keeps you hooked. The withdrawal also triggers your ego. You want to prove that you were worthy of her consistency, that you didn't misread the situation, that it meant something. But the more you try to regain what was lost, the more you lose your position. This is how you get caught in a cycle. Closeness, pull away, pursuit, brief reconnection, repeat. Each loop weakens your boundaries while reinforcing hers. The solution? Resist the urge to chase. Let her feel your withdrawal. Let her wonder why you stopped reaching out. Don't ask what's wrong. She knows what she's doing. Instead, remember, someone who values connection stays when things get close. Someone who uses closeness to manipulate will retreat. Then wait to see if you come running. In the world of Machiavelli, emotional distance is a strategy of dominance, and the best counter is emotional detachment. Disappear. After intimacy, to create pursuit. One of the most emotionally charged tactics often employed in modern dating and relationships, especially from a manipulative or strategic standpoint, is disappearing after intimacy. This move, which seems cruel on the surface, is actually a Machiavellian maneuver designed to create tension, uncertainty, and most importantly, desire. Here's why it works. After intimacy, especially if it's emotionally charged, the human brain releases oxytocin, the bonding hormone. In men and women alike, this chemical surge creates a sense of closeness and trust. However, in women, studies have shown this bonding effect tends to be stronger, especially when emotional connection and physical closeness are combined. So, what happens when someone disappears right after this moment? It creates a vacuum. The sudden absence isn't neutral, it's jarring. The mind races to fill the silence. Did I say something wrong? Is she losing interest? Was it just physical for her? The very same brain that was flooded with feel-good bonding chemicals is now steeped in anxiety and a need for resolution. This is where the pursuit begins. The absence becomes louder than any words ever spoken. Machiavelli himself emphasized the power of absence and scarcity. Men are driven more by the fear of losing than by the desire of gaining. By pulling back right after closeness, the manipulator uses fear, the fear of losing connection, to hook deeper into the psyche of the other. This isn't about ghosting forever. No, it's a calculated move. Pull away, allow uncertainty to grow, then reappear just enough to keep the emotional roller coaster alive. It also feeds into a common psychological pattern: intermittent reinforcement. This is the same dynamic that makes slot machines addictive. You don't win every time, but when you do, it feels euphoric. A person who disappears after intimacy is playing the same game. When they finally return, even with a simple message, it feels like a reward. And the brain, now conditioned by inconsistency, becomes hooked on the highs and terrified of the lows. This tactic also positions the person who disappears as higher value. Why? Because availability is often interpreted as lower worth. In our minds, things that are rare are expensive, emotionally or otherwise. By being less available after a moment of vulnerability, the person signals, "I'm not easily won. Even after closeness, I have a world outside of you." That message, whether intended or subconscious, taps into our desire to prove our own value. People chase what they can't fully grasp, and the cruel genius of this tactic is that it leverages emotional vulnerability to create a stronger hook. The one who disappears isn't being lazy, they're being strategic. They understand the currency of absence. They know that in today's world of constant messaging, silence is louder than noise. Ultimately, this isn't about love. It's about control. It's about turning a moment of emotional connection into a psychological weapon. It's cold, it's calculated, and it works. Be hot and cold to maintain power. The hot and cold approach isn't just indecision or emotional immaturity. It's an art form of manipulation when done with intention. It mimics the unpredictability of nature itself. Sunny one moment, stormy the next. And for the person on the receiving end, this volatility becomes addictive. When you're warm, engaging, flirtatious, hot, you create connection, comfort, and a glimpse of closeness. This is when dopamine spikes. You're giving attention, validation, maybe even praise. The other person feels wanted, attractive, interesting. They begin to relax and attach. Then suddenly, you pull back. You're cold, distant, unavailable. You're not cruel, just blank. Or worse, slightly irritated. The change doesn't match the moment. There's no clear reason. And that's where the power lies. This emotional unpredictability keeps the other person off balance. They begin to question their worth, their actions, even their memories. Was it something I said? Did I do something wrong? And just when they feel they've lost you, when the anxiety reaches its peak, you warm up again. The cycle repeats. This is emotional conditioning, and it mirrors the way toxic attachments form. The same principle is used in interrogations, sales tactics, even cult indoctrination. Highs and lows, reward and withdrawal. You're keeping the nervous system in survival mode, and in that state, people bond more intensely. Machiavelli would argue that to hold power, it's better to be feared than loved, if you must choose. But the truly skilled manipulator ensures they're both, at different times and always on their own terms. That's what hot and cold accomplishes. You're not predictable. You're not safe. You're desired, even when you're resented. Because the highs are just that good. And it works especially well in the modern era, where emotional overstimulation is rampant. We scroll through validation and ghosting every day. We've been primed to crave emotional inconsistency. When someone mimics this rhythm in real life, it doesn't seem abnormal. It seems familiar. The tactic is powerful because it feels like reality itself. But here's the true Machiavellian layer. Being hot and cold on purpose communicates dominance. You're saying, I control the rhythm. I decide when you feel close and when you feel ignored. You don't get to expect me. You get to earn me. It keeps the other person invested, always reaching for the next high. And the more they try to regain that warmth, the more leverage you hold. You become the prize, the thermostat they're constantly trying to read, adjust, and appease. Power isn't about being mean. It's about creating a structure where the other person feels unsure, and that uncertainty keeps them emotionally locked in. Be too hot too often, and you'll be taken for granted. Be too cold too long, and they'll give up. But dance between the two, you'll live rent-free in their head. And that's exactly the point. Keep options open, but expect loyalty. This is a textbook double standard, and yet it's one of the oldest games in the book, one that Machiavelli himself would likely admire for its cunning asymmetry. The core philosophy? You never fully commit. You keep your options visible, your independence intact, but you demand total loyalty from the person you're involved with. Why does this tactic work? Because it's about emotional leverage. When someone knows you have other options, or even just suspects that you do, it instantly alters the power dynamic. You are no longer trapped. You're not depending on their attention, affection, or validation. You have alternatives. Even if you're not actively pursuing them, their existence hangs in the air like an unspoken threat. And yet you make it clear, subtly or overtly, that you expect exclusivity from the other person. You expect full loyalty, full access, full emotional bandwidth. Any sign of disloyalty on their part is met with suspicion, guilt-tripping, or emotional withdrawal. It's a trap, and a brilliant one. Because this asymmetry creates an imbalance of emotional security. You are stable, they are unstable. You are free, they are bound. And the more they fear your options, the more loyal they become, hoping to win your full attention. They begin to compete, often silently, with phantoms, old flames, future possibilities, your casual mentions of admiration for other people. Even your silence can speak volumes. Maybe she's texting someone else. Maybe I'm not enough. Machiavelli once wrote that a wise leader must never put themselves entirely at the mercy of others. This tactic follows that principle. By never shutting down your possibilities, you stay strategically aloof, untouchable, and by enforcing loyalty, you ensure you are never betrayed. There is also a layer of moral manipulation at play. You paint yourself as honest. I've always been clear that I'm not looking for anything serious. And yet you emotionally act like a partner. You create intimacy, make plans, show affection until their heart is involved. Then, when they want the same clarity from you, you remind them, you knew what this was. This causes internal conflict in the other person. They begin to rationalize their own emotional labor, hoping that if they're loyal enough, devoted enough, patient enough, you'll eventually close off your options. You become the prize they work for, even as they question if they're being played. It's manipulation through ambiguity. And in some cases, it's not even about cheating or physical options. It's about keeping the appearance of freedom. A flirty comment, an active dating profile, friends of the opposite sex you're just close with. It doesn't need to be real, only real enough to keep them guessing. You demand loyalty. You offer uncertainty. And because the emotional stakes are so high, they stay. They hope. They give more, trying to win something you've never truly offered. It's not fair. It's Machiavellian and devastatingly effective. Refuse to define the relationship. One of the most subtle yet powerfully manipulative tactics in the Machiavellian playbook is withholding clarity. Specifically, the refusal to define the relationship, also known as DTR. This move is not just about avoiding labels. It's about preserving leverage, control, and optionality. Machiavelli believed that the prince should never reveal his full intentions. Likewise, refusing to define the relationship is about maintaining ambiguity for strategic dominance. When someone avoids defining the relationship, they're creating an emotional gray zone. You, as the partner, are suspended in a state of hope, anticipation, and often anxiety. You don't know if you're exclusive. You don't know where you stand. You don't even know if what you're building is real or just convenient. And that uncertainty is the exact source of their power. Why does it work? Because clarity is comforting, but comfort breeds equality. Once you both know what this is, there are rules, expectations, emotional reciprocity. But when one person withholds definition, the rules become fluid and one-sided. It creates a power imbalance where one partner is constantly seeking validation and assurance, while the other remains free to explore, manipulate, or exit without accountability. This tactic also keeps you emotionally invested without ever making a real commitment. You're forced to prove your worth over and over, hoping that one day you'll earn the title, girlfriend, partner, wife. But that title is never handed down. It's held just out of reach, like a carrot on a stick. You become a participant in a game you didn't agree to play, but now you can't seem to quit. Refusing to define things also gives plausible deniability. If the person is caught flirting with others, being inconsistent, or emotionally distant, they can always fall back on, "We never said we were exclusive." This shields them from guilt while you carry the emotional burden of being loyal in a relationship that technically doesn't exist. In Machiavellian terms, it's a masterstroke of non-commitment paired with full control. You're emotionally locked in. They're strategically untethered. It's not accidental vagueness. It's engineered ambiguity. Compare you to imaginary better men. Nothing destabilizes self-worth quite like comparison, especially to people who don't exist. This tactic is designed to undermine your confidence, create insecurity, and fuel competition in a game where the rules are invisible and the opponent is fictional. In Machiavelli's world, rulers used the idea of foreign threats to keep the population obedient. The modern equivalent in relationships? The threat of better men who are always just around the corner. This isn't always overt. Sometimes it's subtle. A woman might say, "It's funny, most guys I know would have remembered that detail." Or, "My ex always surprised me with flowers, even after fights." These aren't compliments. They're control mechanisms disguised as innocent remarks. What makes this tactic brutal is its vagueness. You can't confront a ghost. You can't compete with a memory or a fantasy. And yet, you feel like you have to do better. Try harder. Prove yourself constantly. You're not just trying to win her approval. You're trying to outperform someone who might not even exist. This comparison game is about reframing your value through her lens. You start questioning your instincts. Was I too cold? Not generous enough? Am I boring? And just like that, your focus shifts from connection to correction. Your natural behavior is replaced by performance. You stop being yourself and start becoming the person you think she wants, never realizing that target is always moving. In classic Machiavellian fashion, this tactic also positions her as the ultimate evaluator. She sets the standards. She controls the narrative of what better looks like. And since the bar is set by imaginary men, you can never truly meet it. The result? A constant feeling of inadequacy that she can exploit to keep you compliant, apologetic, and always striving. Use jealousy to test your reactions. Jealousy is one of the most primal emotions. When triggered, it bypasses logic, rushes past dignity, and taps straight into fear, the fear of loss. A Machiavellian operator knows this, and so does any woman who subtly or overtly uses jealousy to test your emotions, boundaries, and emotional investment. This tactic often begins innocently. A casual mention of an attractive coworker, a laugh at a stranger's message, or a cryptic post on social media that seems just a little too flirtatious. These aren't accidents, they're emotional probes. The goal isn't necessarily betrayal, it's to watch how you react. By deliberately provoking jealousy, she gathers data. Will you show signs of possessiveness? Will you chase harder when you sense competition? Will you become insecure, or will you step up? Will you fold under pressure or double down on trying to win her? Jealousy is a tool of emotional measurement. And once you show that it affects you, she knows you're hooked. But there's a darker layer. Once you react, your jealousy is then used against you. If you express discomfort, she may say, "Why are you so insecure?" Or, "You don't trust me?" Suddenly, you're the problem. She creates the storm, then criticizes you for getting wet. Machiavelli advised leaders to provoke tension among rivals to secure their own power. Likewise, when a woman introduces third-party attention into the relationship, she creates a competitive frame. You're no longer focused on us. You're focused on not losing her. That fear rewires your behavior, makes you easier to control, and paradoxically deepens your attachment to the person destabilizing you. And here's the most cunning twist. Even if she has no intention of leaving or cheating, the illusion of options can inflate her perceived value. People desire what seems scarce and in demand. By making you think other men want her, or worse, that she might choose them, she elevates herself in your eyes without ever changing her behavior or giving more of herself. This tactic isn't about disloyalty. It's about power. It's about keeping you emotionally disoriented, reactive, and always fearing what she might do. Give just enough to keep you hooked. There's a method of control so subtle, so quietly calculated, that you might not even realize it's happening to you until you're in too deep. Breadcrumbing. It's the act of giving you just enough emotional, sexual, or relational reward to keep you invested, but never enough to feel secure or satisfied. And it's not an accident. It's strategic. It's Machiavellian. Machiavelli wrote about rulers who maintained loyalty by offering small privileges, tokens of favor, to their subjects without ever delivering true equality or full trust. He advised to keep your friends dependent on you. This is what's happening when a woman gives you fleeting moments of affection, compliments, or even sex, but then withdraws, leaving you chasing the high like an addict. You may get a sweet text, a flirtatious glance, or a random burst of intimacy that seems to signal things are getting better. But as soon as you lean in, she pulls away. Not enough to break it off. Just enough to make you feel like you need to prove something, say the right thing, or wait longer. It's no different from a slot machine at a casino. Small wins keep you feeding the machine, long after it's stopped paying out. This kind of manipulation doesn't look aggressive. In fact, it can be packaged as emotional unpredictability, busyness, or moodiness. She might say things like, "I'm just going through something," or I need time to figure things out, while still throwing out enough emotional crumbs to keep you from walking away. But those crumbs are not kindness, they're control levers. And it works best on people who crave connection, especially men over 40 who've already invested emotionally or financially into a relationship. The more you've put in, the harder it is to walk away. You keep thinking, she just needs a little more time, or I can fix this if I show her I care more. That's the hook. This tactic is designed to create emotional starvation. It conditions you to lower your standards. Over time, you begin to settle for less and less. Just a little affection, a little attention, a little sex, anything to keep the connection alive. But it's not love, it's behavioral manipulation. She's not confused. She's not overwhelmed. She knows exactly how to dangle the bait without ever feeding you fully. In Machiavellian terms, this is psychological rationing. It makes sure that your emotional needs remain unmet just enough to make you depend on her to fill them. And the longer it goes on, the more the roles reverse. You're no longer evaluating if she's right for you. You're desperately trying to be enough for her. This keeps you trapped in a feedback loop where her smallest gesture feels like a reward and her absence feels like punishment. The game is never to fulfill you. It's to make sure you're never full enough to walk away, make you earn back what she already promised. This tactic is as cruel as it is effective, and it often goes unnoticed until the damage is already done. It revolves around a broken promise, but not in the obvious way. Instead of simply failing to deliver, the promise becomes a bargaining chip. She makes you earn back something she already offered, whether it's affection, commitment, loyalty, or even something as serious as marriage or reconciliation. It's a deliberate shifting of the goalpost, and it's pure Machiavellian strategy. In The Prince, Machiavelli warned that a ruler must be prepared to break promises when doing so serves his power. He emphasized that promises are only tools to manipulate the expectations of others, not obligations to be honored. Likewise, in the emotional battlefield, some women make bold declarations of love, commitment, or future plans, not to follow through, but to gain leverage. At first, it feels sincere. She tells you she wants to move in together, start a family, or build a future. Maybe she even promises to change, to be more affectionate, less critical, more available. But right when you start acting on those promises, buying the house, booking the trip, adjusting your life, something shifts. Suddenly, she's distant, cold, and you're left wondering, what changed? What changed is that you believed her, and now she has the upper hand. The promise becomes a ghost. She'll say things like, "You just need to show me you're serious," or "I'm not sure if I can trust you yet," flipping the script entirely. Now, instead of her proving herself to you, you're working to win back something she already offered. That's the game. This tactic is especially effective on men who take commitment seriously. If you're over 40 and you've been through emotional investments, divorces, long-term relationships, or raising kids, you understand the cost of trust. When a woman promises something meaningful, you assume it's a foundation. But to her, it may be bait. Not for love, for compliance. You might start bending your own boundaries, doing more, sacrificing your time, even your dignity, just to get back what you thought you had. But it's not coming back. Not really. Because the goal was never to follow through. It was to make you depend on the promise. This tactic works long-term because it creates emotional debt. You always feel one step behind. You feel like you've messed up somehow, even if you haven't. That guilt drives you to perform, apologize, and overinvest. Machiavelli would call this managing appearances. Keep the illusion alive long enough, and the people will serve you, not because of fear or force, but because of hope. And when hope is tied to a reward you're made to constantly chase, the power dynamic becomes inescapable. She doesn't have to control you directly. She just has to remind you of what she used to say, then watch you work yourself to the bone trying to earn back what she never intended to give. Control your social image by gossip. Gossip is often dismissed as petty or trivial, but in reality, it's one of the oldest tools of psychological warfare. For the Machiavellian mind, gossip isn't about idle chatter. It's a mechanism of social control. When used intentionally, gossip allows you to shape perception, weaken rivals, and manipulate how others view both you and the people around you, all without appearing to do anything at all. At its core, gossip is a weapon of narrative. People don't need to know the truth. They need a version of the truth that feels real, that aligns with their suspicions, or that confirms their biases. When you introduce well-placed comments about someone's motives, behavior, or credibility, you're not delivering information. You're planting seeds. Those seeds grow into assumptions and eventually into reputations. Machiavelli wrote that it is not essential that a prince should have all the good qualities, but it is essential that he should seem to have them. The same applies to your social image. You don't have to be kind, generous, or loyal. You only need people to believe you are. Gossip lets you curate that belief behind the scenes. But here's where the true brilliance lies. You can control how people talk about you by controlling how they talk around you. Drop a vulnerable story about a past betrayal and frame yourself as someone who values loyalty above all. Casually mention how some people just crave attention right before you exit a social group, leaving the implication that you're above it. Each statement isn't just a comment, it's a mirror, subtly shaping what people see when they think of you. The real Machiavellian twist, however, is how gossip works not just for you, but against others. You don't have to attack someone directly. All it takes is an innocent question. Have you noticed how often she talks about herself? Or, I wonder if he's doing okay. He's been acting strange lately. These aren't accusations. They're provocations. You let others fill in the blanks and they become complicit in the smear. You walk away clean while the target begins to suffer socially. Even more potent is the long game. By consistently nudging certain narratives into circulation, you can rewrite someone's role in the group. Turn the popular into the attention seeker. Turn the quiet into the suspicious. And when you do speak well of others, it's strategic, reserved only for those who serve your image or owe you loyalty in return. In essence, gossip allows you to be everywhere without being seen. You don't need a platform or a title, just a voice in the right ear at the right time. Over weeks, months, even years, you can quietly sculpt your place in the social hierarchy, rising while others falter under suspicions they never saw coming. It's not about truth. It's about control. And the ones who control the whispers often end up controlling the room. Charm your friends and allies. In the Machiavellian playbook, charm isn't just a pleasant trait. It's a strategic currency. Charm buys loyalty, hides your true intentions, and keeps people emotionally invested in you, even when your actions serve only yourself. And when deployed with precision, charm can transform allies into devotees and friends into extensions of your will. Unlike brute force or intimidation, charm is non-threatening. That's its power. While others lead with commands, you lead with smiles, inside jokes, shared vulnerabilities, and attentiveness. You make people feel seen, and in return, they lower their guard. They trust you, not because they should, but because it feels right. Machiavelli famously warned that it is better to be feared than loved, if you cannot be both. But the modern Machiavellian knows that being charming often achieves both. Charm lets you be loved outwardly while keeping people just uneasy enough to crave your approval. It's a soft dominance wrapped in charisma. So how do you use it? Start by giving people what they want most: validation. Compliment their intelligence, not just their appearance. Ask questions that suggest interest in their dreams, their pain, their victories. Then remember those details. When you bring them up days or weeks later, it creates the illusion of deep connection. But it's not real intimacy. It's selective attention used as leverage. You should also know how to make others feel useful. Ask for advice, even when you don't need it. Let people believe they're influencing your life. This creates emotional investment. The more time and energy they spend helping you, the harder it is for them to detach. They've psychologically anchored themselves to you. But charm is also about pace. You don't give all of it at once. You create a rhythm of warmth and withdrawal, a well-timed compliment followed by cool distance, a heartfelt conversation that's never repeated. This creates mystique. People chase after the person who made them feel alive, even if just once. Then there's humor. A Machiavellian doesn't joke aimlessly. They use humor to signal intelligence, ease tension, and to undermine rivals subtly. A sarcastic quip about a competing figure's leadership style can erode respect without ever sounding hostile. You're not attacking, you're laughing. But the seed has been planted. Perhaps most crucially, charm is a shield. When people like you, they forgive you. They explain away your inconsistencies. They defend you when you're not in the room. And if you ever need to pivot, betray, or cut ties, they're left confused, even heartbroken, not angry. That's power. So while others scramble for control through brute force, the charmer moves effortlessly through doors that remain locked to everyone else. People let them in, open up, give more than they intend, and all the while the charmer smiles, because they understand what most never will. Influence is more often given freely than taken by force, and charm is the key to that silent surrender. Flirt publicly to assert dominance. Flirting isn't just for seduction, it's for power. In the hands of a Machiavellian, public flirting becomes a weapon, a signal, a strategy, and a form of control all rolled into one. It's not about getting someone's number. It's about sending a message to everyone in the room. I can, and I know it. Flirting publicly disrupts power dynamics in a bold, visual way. It announces that you're untouchable, confident, and desirable. It provokes attention and, just as importantly, provokes jealousy. And that jealousy? That's leverage. Because when someone wants what you command, or fears losing it, they become easier to manipulate. The act itself doesn't have to be overt. A lingering glance, a laugh that lingers a half-second too long, a touch on the arm, all of these gestures say, I know what I'm doing. And when done in front of an audience, especially one that includes your partner, a rival, or a social group, it sends a message that you're not beholden to anyone's expectations. You are in control of the emotional weather. This is especially effective when your target is already emotionally invested in you. A partner who sees you flirting isn't just annoyed, they're destabilized. They begin to question your commitment, their own value, and whether they're losing ground to someone else. That doubt breeds insecurity, and insecurity breeds dependence. They try harder to win you back, to lock you down, without realizing they've already surrendered the power dynamic. Machiavelli advised leaders to be both lion and fox, bold when necessary, but cunning and evasive. Public flirting captures both. It's bold in its confidence, but evasive in its deniability. If questioned, you can always retreat behind the veil of innocence. I was just being friendly. Now the other person looks controlling, jealous, or insecure. You've won twice, once by provoking desire, and again by flipping the blame. But public flirting isn't just about romantic tension. It establishes social dominance. It makes you the focal point in a group. Others begin to compete for your attention. They start monitoring your cues, aligning their behavior to please you, and adapting to your moods. You become the unspoken leader, not through authority, but through desirability. The trick is control. A true Machiavellian never lets the flirtation escalate beyond their intended threshold. They ignite interest but don't pursue. They hint at access but never deliver fully. This creates a vacuum, one that others fill with effort, affection, or even obedience. In short, public flirting isn't reckless. It's calculated. It destabilizes, signals power, and keeps everyone slightly off balance. You control the spotlight, the tempo, and the emotional undercurrent of the room. And when people start adjusting their behavior around you, not because you ask them to, but because they want to, you'll know dominance has been achieved, not through fear, not through rules, but through allure. Play the victim in every story. One of the most disarming tactics in the female mind game arsenal is the consistent portrayal of oneself as the victim. This isn't about legitimate suffering or unfair treatment. It's about using victimhood as a strategy, a subtle form of emotional control that reshapes narratives, recruits sympathy, and avoids accountability. Machiavelli taught that perception matters more than reality. It is not necessary to be virtuous, only to appear so. Similarly, when someone repeatedly casts themselves as the wounded party, they shape how others perceive them, even if that perception is far from the truth. In doing so, they gain moral high ground, deflect criticism, and rally others to their side. Now imagine this in practice. A woman tells you about her ex, how he cheated, lied, manipulated. Maybe there's truth to it, but as her stories stack up, you notice a pattern. She's always the one who was wronged. Every boss was toxic. Every friend betrayed her. Every man was emotionally unavailable or abusive. You never hear what she may have done. There's no reflection, only accusations. What's really happening here? By playing the victim, she ensures you see her through a sympathetic lens. This makes you more likely to forgive her mistakes, overlook red flags, and excuse problematic behavior. If she lashes out emotionally, it's because of what others did to her. If she starts fights, it's because she's traumatized. If she avoids commitment, it's because she's been hurt too many times. This tactic works especially well on empathetic men, those who've been raised to support and protect, to fix what's broken. If you're a man in midlife who's seen pain and understands the value of second chances, you're an ideal target. You want to believe her. You want to be the one who doesn't hurt her. That desire, while noble, becomes a leash. Here's where it gets darker. The victim narrative also silences you. If you ever try to call her out on manipulation, cold behavior, dishonesty, you become the aggressor. How dare you challenge someone who's been through so much? Now you're the villain. She doesn't need to win arguments. She just needs to look wounded enough that you'll back off. And when others hear her version, they take her side, not because of facts, but because of emotion. That's the power of the victim strategy. It rewrites the story in real time and turns observers into enablers. Machiavelli would call this a masterclass in soft power. Gain control without ever appearing to seek it. Keep your hands clean while others act on your behalf. When a woman always paints herself as the innocent, the misunderstood, the abandoned, pay attention. People who have truly suffered often take ownership of their healing. Those who weaponize suffering, they build fortresses out of it. Your best move is to observe patterns, not just stories. Ask yourself, if someone's always the victim, then who's writing the script? Use your secrets as silent leverage. There's a moment in every deepening relationship where trust is exchanged. You open up, Share your fears, your past mistakes, your vulnerabilities. Maybe you reveal something you haven't told anyone. That's how intimacy is built, through honesty and emotional exposure. But what if those secrets don't just sit quietly in her mind? What if they become tools, held not for comfort or connection, but for quiet leverage? Machiavelli argued that knowing a man's weaknesses is the key to influencing his decisions. In The Prince, he advised rulers to exploit what makes others vulnerable, whether it's fear, desire, or reputation. In modern relationships, a manipulative woman might not say she's using your secrets, but her silence says enough. Let's break this down. You confide in her about your past divorce, your regrets, or how you feel about your strained relationship with your kids. At first, she listens with empathy. She earns your trust, you feel safe. But later, when there's conflict or tension, she doesn't bring it up directly. Instead, she implies things. Maybe this is why your last relationship ended. You always seem to get distant when things get hard. You said you struggle with commitment, remember? She's not accusing. She's reminding. And those reminders place pressure on you. They subtly suggest that your flaws, those you were vulnerable enough to reveal, are being watched, judged, and used as leverage. This is a form of psychological power that requires no threats, no raised voices. It's cold, clean manipulation. She doesn't need to weaponize your secrets openly. She just needs you to remember that she knows, and that she could use them if she wanted to. What's even more dangerous is the way this shapes your future behavior. You start filtering what you say. You hesitate before being honest. You try harder to prove you're not that guy she hinted at. In doing so, you self-censor and self-discipline, not because she asked you to, but because you fear the quiet power she holds. This tactic often escalates during disagreements. When you try to assert yourself, she subtly undercuts your authority by referencing your insecurities. Not in a cruel or obvious way, but in just enough of a whisper to destabilize your confidence. You walk away from the conversation feeling like you lost, even though she never raised her voice. It's a chess move Machiavelli would have admired. She plays the long game. She stores your truths like ammunition, not to fire, but to display occasionally. Just enough to remind you who holds the emotional high ground. What's the antidote? Selective disclosure. Not every part of you needs to be shared early or at all. Trust is earned, not granted by default. If someone consistently uses your past to shape your present behavior, they're not a partner. They're a strategist. And remember, in the wrong hands, vulnerability isn't intimacy. It's insurance. Sabotage your other relationships. One of the most quietly destructive tactics used in psychological manipulation is isolation, specifically the sabotage of your relationships with friends, family, colleagues, or anyone who provides you with a sense of grounding outside of her. It rarely looks like direct hostility. It's much more subtle. At first, she might express concern. I just don't feel comfortable around your friends. Your sister always seems cold to me. That one coworker, she seems like she has feelings for you. This isn't about jealousy. It's about control. Machiavelli taught that a ruler should strike down all those who might pose a threat to his power. In personal dynamics, your social network, your friends, mentors, family, are a threat to her influence. They provide outside perspective. They offer a sounding board. They might see through her, so she chips away at them. Sometimes it's through passive-aggressive remarks. Other times, she plays the victim. I tried so hard with your best friend, but she's always judging me. Your mother never accepts me, no matter what I do. It's just hard being around people who don't support us. The goal isn't always to make you choose, but to make spending time with others feel like a betrayal. She'll pout when you go out without her. She'll get moody after family dinners. She may even cry after gatherings and claim she feels excluded. And you, being empathetic, try to make her feel better. You start canceling plans, pulling back, trying to keep the peace. Eventually, your world shrinks. Friends stop calling. Family grows distant, not because they don't care, but because you're always managing her emotions. And here's the kicker. Once she's successfully isolated you, her influence becomes total. There's no one to check her behavior, no one to point out red flags, no escape hatch when things turn toxic. This isn't always intentional in a conscious way, but whether it's calculated or instinctive, the result is the same: dependency. You become reliant on her for emotional connection, validation, and support. And when things go wrong, when you feel off or confused, there's no one left to talk to who hasn't already been painted as against her. This is the final stage of control, when your external world has been eroded just enough that you don't even notice it's gone. Machiavelli warned that rulers must eliminate competing influences. In relationships, this plays out through emotional sabotage, not with swords, but with silence, guilt, and subtle suggestion. Your defense: pay attention when your relationships start to shrink. If everyone who once mattered suddenly has a problem or can't be trusted, you may not be the one with the blind spot. Preserve your independent connections. They're not just part of your life, they're your shield. Because when someone tries to isolate you, it's not love, it's empire building. And in her empire, you're not the king. You're the subject. Play two men against each other. One of the oldest and most effective manipulation tactics in the social and romantic arena is triangulation, specifically playing two men against each other. It's not about being caught in the middle of a love triangle by accident. No, this is a deliberate and strategic move that leverages competition, ego, and insecurity to create power. When a woman subtly or overtly pits two men against one another, she does something psychologically brilliant. She becomes the prize in a contest they didn't even know they entered. Each man begins to view the other as a threat. Suddenly, they're not just thinking about how to win her attention, they're thinking about how to beat the other guy. That shift is powerful. This tactic works because it taps into the male ego. From a young age, men are conditioned to compete, on the field, in the office, and yes, in romance. When a second contender is introduced, the stakes are raised. Winning her affection becomes a matter of pride, not just desire. And in this dynamic, the woman becomes elevated. She's not just someone they like. She's a status symbol, a measure of their own worth. Machiavelli wrote extensively about the concept of divide and conquer. In politics, this meant ensuring that power struggles among rivals prevented anyone from becoming too strong. In relationships, it means keeping suitors uncertain and on edge. As long as two men are vying for her, neither can relax. Neither feels secure, and insecurity is a fertile ground for manipulation. What makes this tactic even more potent is that it doesn't have to be overt. A woman doesn't have to explicitly say, "There's someone else." She can mention an ex who's still around, or a coworker who's just a friend, but always checking in. She can tell one man the other just doesn't understand her like you do, then tell the second one that he's emotionally distant, unlike you. Each man is given just enough information to spark suspicion and competitiveness, but never enough to confirm anything. The brilliance here lies in emotional misdirection. The men focus on outshining each other rather than evaluating whether the woman herself is playing fair. Their attention is diverted from her actions to each other's flaws. It becomes a race to prove who deserves her more, without ever realizing the race itself was her design. This also gives the woman insulation. If things go wrong with one, she has the other. If one starts pulling away, she can reignite the competition. She's never emotionally dependent, never fully vulnerable. because she holds the balance of desire and rivalry between two people who should, under normal circumstances, never be in conflict. It's not just about romance either. This tactic can play out in friendships, workplaces, even family dynamics. Wherever there are egos, insecurities, and the desire to be chosen, triangulation can thrive. The ultimate Machiavellian move isn't to overpower people directly, it's to make them fight each other while you stay above the fray. And in this game, the woman who plays two men against each other doesn't just win affection, she wins control. Gain sympathy by revealing curated traumas. This is one of the more insidious forms of manipulation, not because it's dramatic or overt, but because it disguises itself as vulnerability. Gaining sympathy by revealing curated traumas is a tactic that uses selective honesty as a tool to disarm, redirect, and control. At first glance, opening up about trauma seems authentic, even brave, and often it is. But in the hands of a Machiavellian mind, this can be weaponized. Not all vulnerability is genuine. Sometimes it's rehearsed, strategically revealed, and perfectly timed for maximum emotional impact. The key word here is curated. The trauma shared is real, but only the parts that serve a purpose are put on display. These stories aren't shared to heal, they're shared to influence. They shift the dynamic in three key ways. First, they lower your guard. When someone shares something painful, your instinct is to show compassion. Your defenses drop. You become less likely to criticize or question their behavior, even if it's inconsistent or manipulative. You rationalize their actions. She's been through a lot. That sympathy becomes a shield she can hide behind. Second, they create unearned intimacy. Sharing trauma can fast-track emotional closeness. It bypasses the usual timeline of trust. When someone opens up quickly and deeply, it creates a sense of connection. We've shared something real, but in this tactic, the connection is one-sided. You open up in response, but your disclosures aren't being used for empathy. They're being cataloged for later. Third, curated trauma becomes an escape route. When cornered or confronted, these stories can be used to dodge accountability. I didn't mean to act that way. I've just been dealing with a lot from my past. It shifts the focus from the behavior in question to the pain behind it. And once again, the topic becomes their suffering, not your concerns. Machiavelli would admire this not for its honesty, but for its utility. He believed that appearances were often more important than truth. And what better appearance than that of a wounded soul seeking understanding? The more you empathize, the less likely you are to question the power dynamics forming around you. This tactic is especially dangerous because it works well. Humans are wired for empathy. When someone reveals a scar, we instinctively want to help them heal. But in this context, the scar isn't shown to be healed. It's shown to gain leverage. Over time, if you're on the receiving end, you may begin to feel emotionally manipulated, but unsure why. You'll forgive inconsistencies. You'll dismiss red flags. You'll excuse disrespect, all because you've been emotionally conditioned to prioritize their pain over your perception. This isn't about invalidating trauma. Real suffering deserves compassion. But when trauma is curated, rehearsed, and revealed for strategic purposes, it stops being vulnerability and starts being control. Act innocent to dodge accountability. Few tactics are more infuriating than watching someone pretend to be innocent, clueless, or fragile to avoid taking responsibility. This tactic is especially powerful because it allows the manipulator to appear harmless, even when they're pulling the strings behind the scenes. Acting innocent isn't the same as being innocent. It's a persona. It's performative. And it serves a singular purpose: to sidestep consequences. Let's break it down. When someone uses this tactic, they adopt traits like wide-eyed confusion, emotional fragility, or exaggerated helplessness when called out. "I didn't know I was hurting you. I was just trying to help. Why are you being so mean to me?" These statements aren't about clarity or communication. They're emotional smoke bombs designed to flip the script. Suddenly, the conversation is no longer about their behavior. It's about your tone, your reaction, your expectations. You go from holding someone accountable to comforting them. You find yourself apologizing to the very person who should be explaining themselves. This tactic is potent because it taps into social scripts, especially around gender. A woman acting innocent, confused, or fragile can often elicit immediate protection or leniency. In a Machiavellian context, this isn't accidental. It's a performance tailored for maximum emotional disarmament. It also creates plausible deniability. "I didn't know. It wasn't my intention." These phrases are shields. They remove malice from the equation and replace it with incompetence or emotional sensitivity. And if the other person pushes too hard, they risk being seen as cruel or aggressive, especially if others are watching. Machiavelli would see this as a perfect example of his belief that people should appear virtuous, even when acting in their own interest. By pretending to be innocent, the manipulator gains the moral high ground. They can control outcomes while looking like a victim. This tactic is often layered with emotional manipulation. Tears, silence, withdrawal, or even fainting spells, in extreme cases, are all tools to redirect attention away from truth and toward emotion. And once emotion takes center stage, accountability dies in the background. The deeper goal? Confuse the narrative. If you're constantly unsure whether they're genuinely unaware or brilliantly deceptive, you're less likely to challenge them. You hesitate. You doubt yourself. And that doubt is the real weapon. It buys them time, space, and control over the narrative. Over time, this behavior erodes healthy boundaries. It trains others to walk on eggshells, to be cautious, to approach difficult conversations like they're disarming a bomb, never knowing if they'll be met with honesty or a dramatic meltdown. Innocence, when used as a strategy, is not weakness. It's camouflage. And the more often it works, the more deeply ingrained it becomes. Because if someone can dodge blame and gain sympathy in the same breath, why would they ever stop? Cry manipulation while manipulating. This is perhaps one of the most devious and paradoxical tactics in the playbook, accusing you of manipulation while actively manipulating you. It's a psychological sleight of hand that immediately puts you on the defensive and reverses the roles of aggressor and victim. Machiavelli warned that perception often matters more than truth. If you can frame your opponent as the villain, even while you yourself are guilty of scheming, you win the battle of appearances, and appearances are often all that matter in emotional dynamics. In the context of relationships, this tactic works by flipping the moral lens. Let's say you question her inconsistencies, you bring up the hot and cold behavior, or you start noticing emotional games. Instead of responding directly, she accuses you of gaslighting, manipulation, control, or even narcissism. Suddenly, you find yourself trying to justify perfectly reasonable behavior. This tactic works because manipulation is an emotionally loaded accusation. It's a scarlet letter. Once it's been pinned on you, even falsely, it casts a shadow over everything you do next. You become hypersensitive. You start second-guessing your intentions. You lower your defenses, trying to prove you're not manipulative. And ironically, that's when you become most vulnerable to being controlled. What makes this tactic so insidious is how it weaponizes the language of emotional awareness. Terms like gaslighting, toxic masculinity, emotional abuse, these are serious, valid concepts. But when misused, they become rhetorical traps. She now appears as the righteous, wounded party, and you're the cold, calculating figure. This is more than deflection. It's preemptive psychological warfare. By calling you manipulative first, she stakes the moral high ground and inoculates herself from accountability. It's Machiavellian in its precision. The best way to prevent being accused of wrongdoing is to accuse first. And there's a deeper consequence. Over time, this repeated inversion of reality can erode your sense of self. You begin to doubt your ability to judge character, situations, even your own feelings. This is textbook gaslighting, ironically performed by the person who claims to be its victim. So the tactic isn't just effective, it's devastating. You're trapped in a loop of justification, guilt, and self-censorship, while the true manipulator operates unchecked behind a mask of moral authority. Dangle intimacy as a reward. In a Machiavellian relationship, nothing is given freely, especially intimacy. Instead, it's turned into a reward system. This tactic is about establishing control by making emotional or physical closeness contingent on performance, obedience, or emotional surrender. Imagine a relationship where affection, praise, or sexual connection is always just slightly out of reach. You get close, but there's always a condition. I just need to feel like you're really listening. Or, if you'd handled that better, maybe tonight would have gone differently. These aren't romantic cues. They're transactional levers. Intimacy is now a currency, and she's the central bank. Machiavelli wrote about the power of illusion, how rulers should appear generous while being calculating underneath. This is precisely how intimacy is used in this tactic. You're made to feel like connection is just around the corner, if only you act right, say the right thing, or prove yourself. But the goalpost keeps moving. This approach works on a psychological level because it taps into approval-seeking behavior. When intimacy becomes a prize, your focus shifts from mutual connection to performance-based affection. You start earning love instead of sharing it. And that keeps you locked in. Over time, this tactic rewires how you perceive intimacy. It becomes associated with compliance. If you challenge her, she becomes cold. If you show independence, she becomes distant. But when you apologize, submit, or align with her expectations, suddenly she's warm again. You're not being loved, you're being conditioned. This tactic is also effective because it creates hope-driven addiction. You remember the early days when intimacy flowed freely. You tell yourself, if I can just fix this, we'll get back to that. But that time was never the baseline. It was the bait. Now, the real game begins. And here's the kicker. Even if she doesn't withhold intimacy outright, the suggestion that it's earned keeps you psychologically tied to her approval. She may never say it directly, but you know it when you feel it. This is not about natural fluctuations in desire. It's about weaponizing closeness as a means of control. It's Machiavellian love, strategic, conditional, and always slightly out of reach. Withdraw sex as punishment. This tactic is a sharpened version of the previous one, only now it's not about dangling the carrot, it's about using the stick. In this case, sexual connection is weaponized, not as a reward, but as a punitive tool to express displeasure, reassert dominance, or manipulate behavior. Withdrawing sex as punishment sends a crystal clear message. You have displeased me. You will now be denied. On the surface, it might appear justified. Arguments, emotional tension, personal boundaries. But when this becomes a pattern, it transforms from a personal boundary into a psychological control mechanism. Machiavelli advised rulers to make punishments memorable. When used effectively, they remind the subject who holds the real power. In a romantic context, sex is often the most intimate expression two people share. To revoke it strategically signals dominance on the deepest level. It says, "This part of me is no longer available to you, not because I need space, but because I'm in charge." The impact of this tactic is multifold. First, it triggers insecurity. The deprived partner begins questioning their attractiveness, their worth, even their desirability. Self-doubt creeps in, and from that place of emotional weakness, compliance grows. The person being punished becomes more agreeable, more accommodating, desperate to restore balance. Second, it reorients the emotional center of the relationship. Intimacy is no longer mutual. It's now a one-sided decision. It's no longer, we connect because we want to. It becomes, you only get this part of me when I feel like you deserve it. This framing gives immense power to the one withholding, and over time, this punishment system can create emotional fatigue. The deprived partner stops voicing concerns or drawing boundaries for fear of triggering sexual withdrawal. They trade authenticity for access. And that's exactly the goal, to make sex a lever for behavioral control rather than a shared expression of love. To be clear, withholding sex because of a genuine emotional disconnect is human. But doing it repeatedly and tactically as a way to gain the upper hand? That's strategic manipulation, straight out of Machiavelli's doctrine of fear and control. Use intimacy to erase wrongdoing. There's a tactic so deceptively warm, it can make you forget you were ever hurt in the first place. It's the use of intimacy, not as an act of connection, but as a tool of manipulative repair. This is when emotional or physical closeness is used not to resolve a conflict, but to overwrite it. You've been mistreated, lied to, belittled, or even emotionally neglected. But instead of a real apology or changed behavior, she offers sex, tenderness, or vulnerability. And in that moment, you forget everything. This is emotional sleight of hand, a masterstroke of manipulation that Machiavelli would have admired for its efficiency. In The Prince, he emphasizes that perception outweighs reality. People judge generally more by the eye than by the hand, he says. Meaning, if you can make someone feel safe and loved, even briefly, they're less likely to challenge what's really happening. Intimacy, when used this way, becomes a kind of eraser, not for her conscience, but for your memory. The argument that had you questioning the relationship yesterday suddenly feels distant because she curled up beside you, kissed you gently, or initiated sex. That raw, unresolved tension is now coated in dopamine and oxytocin, the brain's reward chemicals. And your body starts working against your judgment. Many men, especially those over 40, have seen this cycle play out. One day you're feeling disrespected, questioning her loyalty or your own happiness. Then after a night of passion or an emotional heart-to-heart, you're saying to yourself, maybe it's not so bad. You justify, you rationalize, and you forgive, not because the issue was resolved, but because the pain was temporarily numbed. But here's the key. She knows this works. This isn't random. It's calculated. It's using pleasure and closeness as a shortcut to avoid accountability. And the more it works, the more it will be used. You'll start seeing a pattern. Every time she crosses a line, intimacy follows. It becomes the reset button. Not because she's sorry, but because she's skilled. This tactic teaches you, subconsciously, that your boundaries are negotiable, that mistreatment is temporary, as long as the makeup phase feels good. Over time, it erodes your ability to stand up for yourself. You're not forgiving because she's changed. You're forgiving because she made you feel something powerful. That's not healing. That's conditioning. From a Machiavellian perspective, this tactic is genius. It manipulates not through force, but through indulgence. It keeps you emotionally bonded while leaving the underlying problems untouched. And because humans crave intimacy, you begin to associate the very person causing pain as the one who relieves it. That's the trap. This is not the embrace of reconciliation. It's the anesthetic of control. Introduce competition through harmless flirting. Jealousy is one of the most visceral emotions you can experience. It hijacks logic, ignites insecurity, and flips the power dynamic instantly. And some people know this. In fact, they weaponize it. One common way to stir jealousy in a relationship is through what seems like harmless flirting. Maybe it's her being overly friendly to the waiter, laughing just a little too long at another man's jokes, mentioning how someone at work complimented her. Always done with a smile, always just subtle enough that you're the one who ends up feeling paranoid for noticing. This tactic is rooted in Machiavellian power play. He taught that to maintain control, a ruler must keep others slightly off balance, not in open revolt, but never fully comfortable. By subtly introducing perceived competition, she keeps you chasing, keeps you questioning your value, and most importantly, keeps you working for her attention. The genius of harmless flirting is that it's deniable. If you bring it up, she can flip it on you. You're being insecure, or I was just being friendly. And now you're not just feeling threatened, you're also being gaslit. This double bind makes you self-police your emotions. You start thinking, maybe I'm the problem. You bury the jealousy. You overcompensate. You try harder to win her full focus again. This tactic is especially effective for women who are naturally charismatic, the kind who can charm others effortlessly while keeping plausible deniability. But the underlying motive is always the same: to stimulate a fear of loss. Because when you fear losing someone, you behave more compliantly, more attentively, more desperately. Men in their 40s, 50s, and 60s often find themselves blindsided by this dynamic, especially if they're used to being in control in other areas of life. In business, you identify competition and act decisively. In relationships, you're told to trust her, but when that trust is repeatedly strained by constant low-grade flirtation, it becomes a slow erosion of your self-worth. You feel like you're never quite enough. From a Machiavellian standpoint, this is manufactured scarcity. It creates the illusion that her attention is in demand, that others want her, and you're lucky to have her. It reframes the relationship from mutual love to competitive privilege. And once you believe you're in a competition, you start to accept terms you never would have agreed to before. This isn't about connection. It's about leverage. The more you feel like you're at risk of being replaced, the easier it is for her to steer the dynamic in her favor. Your fear keeps you loyal, even when your logic tells you to walk away. Make you feel lucky to be with her. This tactic may be the most psychologically profound of all, getting you to believe you hit the jackpot, that she's out of your league, that other men want her, that she could leave at any time, and you're the one who needs to keep up. And if she pulls this off, she doesn't need to demand your compliance. You'll volunteer it. Machiavelli wrote that the appearance of greatness is more important than greatness itself. If a ruler seemed larger than life, the people would never question their authority. Similarly, when a woman engineers her desirability to appear scarce, in demand, or superior, it triggers a deep-rooted fear that you are replaceable, and she is not. She may do this subtly through the way she presents herself. She talks about her exes, but only the wealthy, powerful, or handsome ones. She references how often she gets hit on, even if she dismisses it with mock annoyance. She may have a constant stream of male attention on social media, or friends telling you she could have any guy. All of this is curated to make you see her as the prize, and if you start to believe that, your behavior begins to change. You become more agreeable, you compromise more. You stop calling out bad behavior because you fear losing her. The power dynamic shifts entirely. This tactic is especially damaging because it flips healthy partnership into performance. You're no longer engaging as equals, you're performing to stay chosen. And every mistake you make, Every disagreement, every missed signal feels like a potential deal breaker. You start walking on eggshells, not because she's threatening to leave, but because she doesn't have to. The implied threat is enough. And here's the most sinister part. The more you try to prove you're worthy, the less attractive you appear, because trying too hard signals insecurity. And that reinforces her belief that she holds the power. It's a vicious cycle, one she never has to break, because you won't risk breaking it. This is Machiavellian ego manipulation at its finest. Make someone doubt their value, elevate your own, and let their insecurity do the work. The ultimate trick is not convincing someone you love them. It's convincing them they don't deserve you. And once you believe that, you'll put up with anything. Turn physical connection into emotional leverage. Physical intimacy is one of the most powerful emotional currencies in human interaction. But most people spend it casually, unaware of the psychological ripple effects it produces. The Machiavellian, however, understands that physical closeness, whether through touch, affection, or sex, is not just a bonding tool. It's leverage. Strategic, targeted, emotional leverage. At the core of this tactic is one undeniable truth. Human beings crave connection. Once you give them that connection, especially in a deeply physical form, they associate it with validation, acceptance, and even love. And once they start to associate you with those feelings, you gain influence over their decisions, emotions, and even self-worth. Think about how the brain reacts during and after intimacy. Neurochemicals like oxytocin and dopamine flood the system, creating a sense of safety and pleasure. This isn't just biology, it's programming. When someone becomes the source of those chemicals, the mind begins to associate them with relief, happiness, and emotional grounding. That association is what the Machiavellian manipulator exploits. By controlling when and how physical connection occurs, you create a reward system. You become the dispenser of emotional highs, and like any addictive cycle, the other person begins to crave your presence, not because of logic or compatibility, but because their brain tells them they need you. That's not love, that's psychological conditioning. This tactic becomes particularly potent when used in cycles. For example, after a moment of distance or argument, suddenly offering physical intimacy can flood the emotional gap with a sense of resolution, even if no real problems have been addressed. You've now hijacked their emotional reasoning. They're no longer thinking, "Is this relationship healthy?" They're thinking, "I feel better now." The line between resolution and seduction becomes blurred. The key is not to offer physical connection constantly. That devalues it. The power lies in timing and scarcity. Reward them when it benefits your position. Withdraw it when you want them to feel unstable. That push and pull creates dependence, and dependence breeds compliance. Physical touch can also be used subtly. A hand on the shoulder during a moment of tension can disarm someone. A kiss after delivering difficult news can redirect their emotional response. A sudden embrace can collapse emotional boundaries. Each of these moves creates an invisible bond, a sense that you care, even if your actions say otherwise. Machiavelli advised rulers to appear virtuous without being bound by virtue. This is exactly the principle at work. You don't need to genuinely connect emotionally. You only need to mimic the signs of intimacy to create emotional debt. The other person feels close to you and assumes that closeness is mutual. Meanwhile, you retain full control. Over time, you can build a relationship dynamic where your physical affection is not just desired, but required for emotional stability. That's when you know you've achieved dominance. When the person across from you no longer sees touch as a gift, but as a necessity only you can provide. Escalate quickly, then pull back. Escalation is intoxicating. It builds adrenaline, mystery, and a rush of potential. The Machiavellian tactician understands that most people are starved for stimulation, and if you can create rapid emotional or romantic momentum, you can knock someone off their emotional balance before they even know what's happening. But what makes this tactic truly powerful is not the escalation. It's the withdrawal that follows it. Here's how it works. You come in strong. Intense interest, fast connection, vulnerability, maybe even physical intimacy. You flood their emotional receptors with attention and possibility. This pace catches them off guard. They skip past their usual defenses. Their brain starts connecting dots too quickly. Maybe this is something real. Maybe I've finally found someone who sees me. In a matter of days or weeks, they start investing. Mentally, emotionally, sometimes even logistically. Then you pull back. Suddenly, your energy drops. The messages slow down. You become busy, emotionally distant. You offer vague excuses instead of clarity. That contrast between the highs of escalation and the silence that follows is what delivers the real punch. It's the emotional equivalent of withdrawal. And just like any addiction, they begin craving the high again. They chase. They question themselves. Did I do something wrong? Did I scare them off? This shift redirects the emotional narrative. They no longer see you as someone to assess. Instead, they start seeing themselves as someone who might be inadequate. This turns the tables. You're no longer the one proving your value. They are. The faster the escalation, the deeper the psychological collapse. When it slows. Machiavelli emphasized the importance of destabilizing opponents without them realizing it. This tactic is a direct application of that philosophy. It creates internal conflict within the target, one where their need for answers outweighs their need for boundaries. And here's the beauty. If they confront you, you always have the fallback of plausible deniability. I just got busy. I move fast sometimes, then I get scared. Or, you're reading too much into things. These statements gaslight without overt manipulation. They make the other person feel like they're the ones pushing too hard. Over time, this cycle can be repeated. Each escalation draws them back in. Each pullback deepens their emotional dependency. They come to believe that the relationship's pace is simply intense, when in reality, it's carefully crafted emotional turbulence. The final result? You've created a push-pull loop that keeps them focused on regaining your affection rather than questioning whether they should. This is dominance by acceleration, followed by silence. Offer intimacy after conflict to blur judgment. One of the most disorienting emotional tactics in any relationship is sudden tenderness after a blowout. The fight might have been cruel. Voices raised, doors slammed, words thrown like daggers. But then, just as the other person is reeling, you reach out. You kiss them. You hold them. You whisper, "Let's not fight anymore." This isn't peacemaking. This is a Machiavellian tactic, using intimacy to scramble logic, suppress anger, and reset emotional tension without actually resolving anything. It's a way to erase the consequences of conflict. Machiavelli believed that rulers should not eliminate tension completely, but control it, and control the timing of its release. Intimacy after conflict does exactly that. When the brain is in fight or flight mode, it's emotionally raw, vulnerable. Following that with sudden closeness feels like safety. It creates a dramatic contrast, and the person on the receiving end often experiences it as intense relief. They associate you with that relief, not the damage that preceded it. Here's the psychological mechanism. The mind cannot easily hold two conflicting emotional states at once. If you overwhelm anger with affection, the emotional brain starts to override the rational one. Maybe it wasn't that bad. We clearly still love each other. If we can still connect after this, It must mean something. These thoughts blur boundaries. They make judgment foggy. The memory of pain becomes diluted by the sensation of warmth. This tactic is particularly potent when combined with physical intimacy. Sex after a fight doesn't resolve issues. It suppresses them. But it feels like resolution. That's the key. The other person stops pursuing clarity. They start pursuing comfort. That shift works in your favor. You can also weaponize apologies in this moment. A soft apology paired with a kiss carries far more weight than a detailed explanation. "I hate fighting with you" becomes more persuasive when whispered in bed than shouted across a room. And yet no real resolution has occurred. The cycle is ready to repeat. Over time, this method creates an emotional pattern. Conflict becomes the prelude to intimacy. The other person unconsciously begins to tolerate more aggression because they've been conditioned to expect closeness afterward. You've reprogrammed them to interpret pain as a step toward passion. This is not reconciliation. It's redirection. You're not solving problems. You're exploiting the emotional chaos to create deeper bonds of dependency. The more confusion there is, the more the other person looks to you for clarity. And when you give them comfort without correction, they accept the story that you're telling them. "We're fine. It's not that serious. This is just how we are." That's not love. That's control. And it works because the line between affection and manipulation has been carefully, deliberately erased. Frame desire as conditional on behavior. One of the most psychologically effective manipulations in romantic dynamics is conditional desire. In simple terms, it's when affection, intimacy, or validation is no longer freely given. It becomes a reward, a tool of control. It's not, "I want you because of who you are." It's, "I'll want you if you behave how I expect." This tactic is deeply Machiavellian because it doesn't use overt threats or conflict. It's quiet, strategic, and it works on a primal level, especially for men conditioned to earn love rather than simply receive it. At first, the woman seems fully engaged. There's affection, passion, interest. You feel chosen, wanted, desired. But over time, subtle shifts occur. You say something she doesn't like. Suddenly, she goes cold. You spend time with your friends instead of her. Suddenly, she's less affectionate. You assert a boundary. Suddenly, she needs space. The desire begins to feel fragile, like it's dependent on your performance. You start thinking, "If I just get it right, she'll come back to me." And that's the trap. By making her desire conditional, she shifts the power dynamic. You're no longer equals in the relationship. You're on a behavioral leash. You're adjusting your tone, walking on eggshells, thinking twice before speaking, not because you're afraid of an argument, but because you're afraid of losing her warmth. In The Prince, Machiavelli discusses how rulers should control their people with calculated rewards and punishments, never showing their full hand. A manipulative partner does the same. She withholds attention just long enough for you to miss it, then gives a little back, enough to hook you again. This creates a powerful psychological loop called intermittent reinforcement. The brain starts craving the reward more intensely precisely because it's inconsistent. She never has to say, "I'll only want you if you act this way." She just shows it, subtly and repeatedly, until you internalize the rules. And what's worse, you start believing that you're the problem. That if you were just a little more thoughtful, a little more patient, a little more emotionally available, things would go back to how they were. But here's the truth. The moment desire becomes a transaction, it's no longer love, it's leverage. This tactic is especially potent in relationships where one partner is conflict avoidant. She doesn't scream, she doesn't argue, she just withdraws. The silence is worse than a fight because it feels like rejection without closure. Over time, you stop expressing your needs. You stop setting boundaries. You learn that affection has become conditional, and you either obey the conditions or you go without. The way out? Recognize the pattern. Real desire doesn't fade with disagreement. Real affection isn't a tool to shape your behavior. If someone's interest in you fluctuates based on your obedience, you're not in a relationship. You're in a training program. And the longer you stay, the harder it becomes to remember what unconditional connection even felt like. Create the illusion of exclusivity while exploring options. One of the most deceptive tactics in modern relationship dynamics is creating the illusion of exclusivity. It's when someone acts like you're the only one, while quietly keeping their options open. This isn't about transparency or polyamory. This is about strategic misdirection designed to keep you invested while she shops around. This tactic works because it feels real. You go on regular dates. She texts you first. She compliments you, introduces you to a few friends, maybe even hints at a future together. You feel chosen. You start to relax into the idea that she's off the market. And so are you. But behind the scenes, she's keeping the door wide open. She might still be chatting with others, swiping on dating apps, going to events just for fun, but never mentioning who she's with. She never lies outright. Instead, she tells you just enough to keep your hopes high and your guard low. Machiavelli would call this optical diplomacy. Present one face to the target while pursuing a separate agenda behind closed doors. He warned leaders to appear virtuous, even when manipulating ruthlessly. Similarly, this tactic relies on emotional camouflage, acting monogamous without ever committing. There are subtle signs. She avoids defining the relationship, claiming labels feel too heavy right now. She doesn't delete her dating profiles but insists she's not really active. She stays vague about her plans and social circle. She gets defensive or evasive when asked direct questions. To you, the emotional investment grows. You start turning down other options. You become more vulnerable, more loyal. Meanwhile, she's hedging her bets, waiting to see who offers the best long-term value, without ever fully letting you go. This tactic keeps her in control. If something better comes along, she can walk away guilt-free. We were never official. But if nothing better materializes, she still has you, emotionally committed and increasingly dependent. It's relationship insurance. And the longer you believe you're exclusive, the harder it is to leave. You've made sacrifices. You've turned down opportunities. You've emotionally anchored to someone who was never fully in the boat to begin with. Machiavelli once said that people are quick to change their ruler when they believe the next will bring greater fortune. In this game, you are the current ruler, or withhold, respected on the surface but replaceable the moment someone more beneficial shows up. The painful irony? You're not competing with other men directly. You're competing with the version of herself she imagines she could have with someone else. And as long as you remain good enough but not ideal, she'll keep looking, quietly. The only defense against this is clarity. Don't settle for maybes. If someone's behavior doesn't match their words, if they avoid commitment while acting possessive, or if they demand loyalty without giving it, understand they're not indecisive. They're buying time, and you're footing the emotional bill. Gaslight your memory of events. Gaslighting is one of the most insidious forms of manipulation, and when done skillfully, it doesn't just change how you feel. It rewrites your reality. This tactic involves deliberately making you question your own memory, perception, or sanity. A woman who gaslights doesn't just deny wrongdoing. She reframes events in such a way that you begin to doubt whether the conflict even happened or whether your response was justified. At its core, gaslighting is a form of psychological warfare. It isolates you, not physically, but mentally. You no longer trust your instincts. You second-guess your emotions. You start thinking, maybe I overreacted. Maybe I misunderstood. Maybe it's my fault. Machiavelli wrote that controlling the narrative is essential for power. A prince must control the mind of his subjects by crafting the story, even if it's a lie. In a relationship, a gaslighter is constantly rewriting the story in real time, and you're being edited out of your own memories. Here's how it works. You recall an argument clearly, what was said, how she acted, what triggered it. But when you bring it up later, she dismisses it entirely. That's not what happened. You're being dramatic. I never said that. Why are you always twisting my words? Over time, your memory starts to feel less reliable. You start deferring to her version of events, not because you believe it, but because you no longer trust your own. This erosion of mental certainty is what gives gaslighting its power. It's not about the event itself, it's about controlling your recall of it. This tactic is especially damaging for older men who value logic, reason, and experience. You've spent decades learning how to trust your judgment, but gaslighting bypasses logic. It targets emotional certainty. The more emotionally attached you are, the easier it is to manipulate your interpretation of the past. A skilled gaslighter doesn't just deny the event, they flip it. They accuse you of being the problem. You always make me feel like I'm doing something wrong. You never listen when I try to explain myself. Why do you always attack me? You end up apologizing for bringing up the issue in the first place. You feel guilty for trying to address your own hurt. Eventually, you learn to stay silent, not to keep the peace, but because you no longer trust that your version of events matters. Gaslighting creates learned helplessness. You stop resisting because it seems pointless. The past is always reinterpreted. The present is always questioned. The future feels uncertain. The key defense? Document reality. Write things down. Talk to trusted friends. Pay attention to emotional patterns. If you consistently feel like you're going crazy or that your emotions are never valid, something is deeply wrong. And remember, people who care about you don't distort your mind. They help clarify it. If someone keeps rewriting your memories, they're not loving you. They're reprogramming you. And Machiavelli would call that the highest form of domination. When you don't need force, just persuasion strong enough to make a man doubt himself. Interrupt and redirect conversations. Interrupting and redirecting conversations isn't just bad manners, it's a manipulative tactic designed to control narrative flow, emotional tone, and ultimately, psychological power. When used intentionally, this strategy allows someone to dominate interactions, avoid accountability, or subtly assert dominance in a way that often goes unnoticed, at least consciously. At first glance, interruptions can seem like mere excitement or enthusiasm. But in a manipulative context, they serve to disrupt your train of thought. When you're in the middle of expressing something important, especially something critical or emotionally charged, and you're cut off, your mind gets jolted. You're forced off balance. That interruption isn't random, it's calculated. This is especially powerful in arguments. Say you're trying to confront someone about behavior that hurt you. You start explaining your perspective, laying out your feelings or pointing out a contradiction. Suddenly, they jump in. Maybe they bring up an unrelated detail, mock your tone, or even pivot to something you did weeks ago. In seconds, you're no longer focused on your original point. You're reacting, defending, following their lead. And that's the goal, control the direction of the conversation. Machiavelli would appreciate the simplicity of this move. He believed that perception often matters more than truth, and by interrupting and redirecting, the manipulator ensures their perception is what gets the spotlight. Facts can be buried under emotional detours and chaotic conversational shifts. Redirection also works by shifting the emotional focus. Suppose you're calling someone out for being unreliable. They interrupt, not with logic, but with emotion. Why are you always so critical of me? Now the spotlight's not on them being unreliable, it's on you being mean. They've hijacked the frame of the conversation. You end up soothing them or explaining your intentions instead of addressing the original problem. In relationships, this is used to derail confrontation. In professional settings, it's used to avoid giving straight answers. In friendships, it creates confusion and suppresses directness. Over time, this trains people to stop trying to have serious conversations because they associate them with emotional chaos or futility. Skilled manipulators use interruption and redirection like a chess player, anticipating every move. The moment you start heading towards something that threatens their image or advantage, they slice in, sometimes with a joke, a criticism, or an emotional appeal. It's a way of keeping you emotionally and intellectually off balance. You may leave the conversation feeling exhausted, unheard, or even unsure what you were trying to say in the first place. That fog isn't accidental. It's the residue of constant redirection. The more it happens, the more you self-censor. You begin avoiding difficult topics altogether. This tactic isn't about winning the truth. It's about preventing the truth from fully forming in the first place. Redefine your words to trap you. This tactic is psychological warfare at its most subtle. When someone redefines your words, they're not just twisting language, they're rewriting your reality. It's a classic technique used in manipulation to destabilize your confidence and put you on the defensive. By misinterpreting what you said, or worse, intentionally reinterpreting your words in the worst possible light, they trap you in a conversation where you look like the problem, regardless of your intent. Here's how it works. Let's say you express a concern. I feel like you haven't really been present lately. A reasonable, emotionally honest statement. But instead of addressing that, the manipulator replies, "So now you're saying I'm a bad partner? That I'm never there for you?" Suddenly, you're not discussing emotional presence. You're defending yourself against an accusation you never made. This is redefinition as entrapment. They're taking your words and assigning them an exaggerated or distorted meaning to shift the power dynamic. This tactic is exhausting because it breaks the normal rules of conversation. In a healthy discussion, both parties try to understand each other's meanings and intentions. In this dynamic, the manipulator pretends to misunderstand you, or, more dangerously, they deliberately twist your words to make you look unreasonable, aggressive, or selfish. It's a form of gaslighting. You start questioning your own clarity. Did I say that wrong? Maybe I was being too harsh. You try to re-explain yourself, to clarify, to de-escalate. But it doesn't matter, because the manipulator doesn't want to understand you. They want you to doubt yourself. Machiavelli would see this as a linguistic version of battlefield maneuvering. You never attack someone directly. You manipulate the terrain so they slip and fall on their own. When someone redefines your words, they're not fighting fair. They're creating a conversation where only they can win. Over time, this tactic trains people to avoid expressing themselves. You begin tiptoeing around every sentence, terrified of being misinterpreted. You censor yourself in advance, not out of kindness, but out of fear. That fear gives the manipulator more power. Now you're self-monitoring in every interaction, trying to say things just right to avoid being twisted. But no matter how precise you are, the redefinition will happen, because it's not about clarity. It's about control. In some cases, the manipulator will redefine your words and then accuse you of gaslighting when you try to correct them. Now you're changing your story. You're backtracking. Again, you're on trial for something that never happened, fighting for your right to even mean what you meant. This tactic is especially effective in emotionally charged relationships, where language is already loaded with feeling. But it also shows up in politics, media, and corporate dynamics. Anytime someone benefits from distorting meaning, you'll see this play out. Language is a weapon, and in the hands of a skilled manipulator, even your own words can be used to hang you. Use questions to manipulate your guilt. Questions are supposed to be tools of curiosity. They're meant to open dialogue, not weaponize it. But in the hands of a manipulator, questions become psychological traps, designed to lead, shame, confuse, or guilt-trip you into submission. This tactic is subtle but highly effective. It doesn't come across as an attack. It sounds like someone trying to understand or get clarity. But the real purpose is to corner you emotionally, often by making you question your own actions, motives, or even morality. Here's how it plays out. Let's say you've set a boundary. I won't tolerate you raising your voice at me. A healthy statement. But instead of acknowledging it, the manipulator hits you with, why are you being so sensitive all of a sudden? Why would you assume the worst of me? Do you really think I would ever hurt you on purpose? Each of these questions sounds harmless on the surface. But dig deeper and you'll see the guilt tactics underneath. They aren't real questions. They're accusations in disguise. Why are you so sensitive? Implies that you are the problem. Do you really think I would hurt you? Reframes the issue so that your discomfort becomes your betrayal of their character. These questions trap you. If you answer honestly, you risk offending them or escalating the situation. If you backtrack, you're erasing your own boundary. Either way, they win. This is where Machiavellian psychology thrives, weaponizing your own empathy against you. Manipulators know that guilt is a powerful motivator, especially in people who care deeply. By asking loaded questions, they place the burden on you to explain, justify, or prove something that was never the issue to begin with. It's a tactic of emotional recentering. Instead of the conversation being about their behavior, it becomes about your reaction to their behavior. Why are you acting distant? Asked right after they crossed a boundary, is not a search for understanding. It's a guilt trip designed to make you feel like the villain for protecting yourself. Worse, these questions are often delivered with hurt expressions or a tone of wounded confusion. The performance is as important as the phrasing. If they look misunderstood, you'll bend over backward to clarify, soften, or apologize. But the moment you do that, the game is already lost. This tactic thrives in emotionally intense relationships, where guilt is a currency. Over time, you may start preemptively managing your words to avoid these questions altogether. You begin sacrificing authenticity just to avoid being made to feel guilty. But guilt that is manipulated through questions isn't moral, it's strategic. It's not about right or wrong. It's about control. And by the time you realize you've been led into a guilt maze, you're already questioning whether you ever had the right to be upset at all. Quote, "You out of context. This is a calculated psychological maneuver where your words are deliberately taken out of their original setting and meaning, repackaged and weaponized. It is not a misunderstanding. It is a strategic reframing intended to shift blame, sow confusion, and erode your credibility." Machiavelli knew the power of selective truth. He once said, "The vulgar crowd always is taken by appearances, and the world consists chiefly of the vulgar." This tactic works by presenting a distorted truth that feels real to the uninformed observer. In personal dynamics, quoting out of context exploits the listener's emotional response, not their understanding of the full situation. Imagine this. You express frustration by saying, "Sometimes I just need space away from all this noise." In context, you're referring to work stress, social obligations, maybe the pressure of constant messaging. But she relays it later as, "He literally told me he wants to be away from me." This version strips nuance, tone, and situation and inserts meaning that wasn't there. Now you're not just misunderstood, you're misrepresented. And that's the point. She doesn't need to lie. She only needs to edit the truth in a way that shifts emotional weight onto you. This tactic is especially dangerous when applied socially. When your mutual friends, family, or even her therapist are told a distorted version of something you said, the emotional narrative becomes hers. You're stuck defending yourself against a version of reality that never existed. And the more you try to explain the context, the more defensive you look. That's the trap. Explaining your side makes you look guilty. In arguments, quoting out of context serves another purpose. It makes you question yourself. You might say, "That's not what I meant," and she'll respond, "But that's what you said." Slowly, you start doubting your memory, your communication, even your sanity. This erosion of confidence, known as gaslighting by quotation, subtly destabilizes your mental footing in the relationship. When you feel like your words can be twisted at any time, you begin to self-censor. You speak less honestly, tiptoe around topics, and fall silent when it matters most. That silence isn't peace, it's control. And that's the endgame of this tactic. Laugh at your seriousness to disarm your point. Humor can be a bonding tool, but when used strategically, it becomes a deflection device. Laughing at your seriousness isn't about being playful. It's about making you seem irrational, overreactive, or out of touch for bringing up something important. Machiavelli taught that ridicule is more powerful than contradiction. If you openly challenge a ruler, you invite resistance. But if you mock him subtly, you undermine his authority without direct confrontation. In personal relationships, laughter at a serious moment has the same effect. It delegitimizes the speaker without engaging their argument. Let's say you bring up a recurring issue. Maybe you feel neglected, disrespected, or miscommunicated with. You speak calmly and clearly. But instead of meeting you in that space, she laughs. Not belly laughs, but a chuckle, a smirk, a light mocking tone. "Oh, you're really upset about that?" Or, "Wow, dramatic much?" The moment shifts. Now, instead of focusing on the issue, the conversation pivots to your tone, your intensity, your weird energy. It's disarming. You're made to feel ridiculous for having emotions. The more you try to reassert the seriousness, the more needy, angry, or unstable you seem. This tactic is about breaking your momentum. Seriousness carries moral gravity, but laughter strips that gravity and replaces it with social discomfort. Eventually, you become reluctant to bring up difficult things. Why would you? You don't want to be laughed at. You don't want your vulnerability mocked or dismissed. So you retreat. You stay quiet. And once again, silence becomes submission. The genius of this tactic is its deniability. If you call her out, she'll say, "I was just joking." But beneath the joke is a message. Your emotions are inconvenient, and I'm not obligated to take them seriously. It's a nonviolent silencing technique, and it's devastatingly effective. Turn your logic against you. This is one of the most sophisticated forms of manipulation. It involves taking your own reasoning, your facts, your arguments, even your well-thought-out emotional observations, and flipping them to undermine your position. It's verbal jujitsu, using your force against you. You might think logic is a safe ground in a relationship, that if you explain clearly and calmly, you can resolve anything. But when facing a skilled manipulator, logic is a tool, not a truth, and it will be used selectively, contextually, and often inverted. Suppose you explain how inconsistent communication is hurting you. You mention how she used to text every morning and now goes silent for hours. Rather than addressing your point, she might respond, "So now I'm not allowed to have space? Isn't that controlling?" Notice what happened. your logical expression of hurt has now been reframed as oppression. Machiavelli warned about arguing with those who are not bound by the same rules. You expect a good faith discussion, but you're entering a chess match where the pieces change shape mid-game. Turning your logic against you works best when you've already revealed your thought process. The more open you are, the easier it is to find emotional loopholes. She doesn't need to prove you wrong. She only needs to redirect the discussion so you seem unreasonable for even bringing it up. Over time, this tactic creates a logic paralysis. You start avoiding debates. Not because you're wrong, but because every discussion ends with you being morally or emotionally repositioned as the aggressor. You're not just wrong in your facts, you're wrong in your intent. This tactic is most cruel when used with emotional vulnerability. You say something like, "When you ignore me for days, it triggers my abandonment wounds." And she replies, "Why are you making me responsible for your trauma?" On paper, that sounds fair, but contextually, it's a weapon. It's the turning of your self-awareness into a reason why your needs are invalid. In essence, she reframes logic as selfishness, empathy as weakness, and vulnerability as manipulation. And once that frame is in place, no amount of reasoning can save you. Frame boundaries as control. One of the most deceptive tactics in the realm of psychological manipulation is the reframing of your boundaries as a form of control. It's subtle, insidious, and often impossible to spot unless you know exactly what to look for. When someone twists your attempts to protect your own peace into accusations of dominance or control, they're not just invalidating your needs, they're flipping the script in a way that makes you question your own sanity. Here's how it works. You set a boundary. Maybe it's something small. You don't want your partner texting their ex. Or maybe it's something larger. You don't want to continue a relationship where shouting or manipulation is tolerated. Instead of respecting those boundaries, the manipulator responds with, "Why are you trying to control me?" Or, "You're so insecure, you have to set all these rules." This is not about your boundary being unfair. It's about recasting your boundary as a character flaw. The brilliance of this tactic, from a Machiavellian perspective, lies in its reversal. Machiavelli believed that perception shapes power more than reality. If a manipulator can make it look like you're the tyrant, they get to keep pushing your limits without ever appearing at fault. You become the overbearing one, the jealous one, the one with issues. This is emotional judo. You try to take a stand, and suddenly you're on the defensive. Now you're explaining yourself, trying to justify why something reasonable, like wanting to be treated with respect, makes you a controlling person. And once you've taken that bait, the power has already shifted. This tactic thrives in modern relationships, especially among emotionally intelligent manipulators. These individuals often weaponize psychological language. They'll accuse you of toxic masculinity, or say you're projecting, or claim that real love doesn't put limits on people. All of this sounds intelligent, progressive even, but it's designed to make you feel wrong for asking for something basic. It's especially dangerous for men over 40 who have spent decades being told to be good providers, protectors, and partners. These men often see boundaries not as control, but as responsibility. When a woman reframes that responsibility into oppression, it creates a cognitive dissonance. Am I being too rigid? Is it wrong to expect loyalty, respect, or peace? No, it's not wrong, but she needs you to think it is. Over time, this wears you down. You begin to question every expectation you bring to the table. You start to accommodate more, tolerate more, and express less. Not because your standards have changed, but because you've been manipulated into believing that having standards at all is abusive. Machiavelli would see this as a masterstroke of public relations. If your enemy can be made to look like the villain while you maintain the moral high ground, you win before the battle even begins. By framing your boundaries as control, she positions herself as the victim, and you, the villain. And once she's got that framing locked in, you'll be stuck in a game where the only way to prove your love is by surrendering your values. Label disagreement as disrespect. Disagreement is a natural part of any relationship. In fact, it's necessary for growth, compromise, and honest communication. But when disagreement is weaponized, framed not as a difference in perspective, but as an attack on character, it becomes one of the most potent tools of emotional control. This tactic works by equating opinion with offense. You say something she doesn't agree with, or you push back on a decision, and suddenly you're accused of being disrespectful, insensitive, or even abusive. The message is clear. You're allowed to have a voice, but only if it echoes hers. From a Machiavellian standpoint, this is a brilliant maneuver. In The Prince, Machiavelli advises rulers to eliminate dissent not with open force, but with strategic discrediting. If a person can be made to look dishonorable or disrespectful simply for expressing disagreement, their arguments lose credibility, even if they're true. This plays out in relationships like this. You raise a concern, and she responds with emotional outrage, tears, or accusations. "I can't believe you'd say that to me. You don't respect me at all." Suddenly, the discussion is no longer about the issue. It's about your character. You're not debating a point. You're defending your integrity. That's the trap. And once you internalize this pattern, the damage is done. You begin to hesitate before expressing yourself. You walk on eggshells, not because you've done something wrong, but because you know that even gentle disagreement can be reframed as betrayal. Over time, your voice disappears. You don't feel like a partner. You feel like a subordinate. This tactic is especially destructive for men with strong values. Men who've worked hard to communicate, lead, and build relationships in good faith. These men often believe in fairness, in reason, in dialogue. But when every disagreement is met with an emotional explosion, that framework collapses. Logic is replaced by fear. Truth is replaced by appeasement. This isn't about respect, it's about obedience. A partner who labels all opposition as disrespect doesn't want connection. She wants control over the emotional narrative. Because once disagreement is off the table, her version of reality becomes the only one that matters. She is always right. You are always apologizing. And worst of all, society often backs this behavior. Men are told to be more understanding, to validate her feelings, even when those feelings are weaponized. But Machiavelli would caution, a ruler who tolerates too much dissent loses control. A partner who tolerates none is already ruling with fear. By reframing disagreement as disrespect, she doesn't have to argue the merit of your point. She just has to make you feel bad for making it. Never argue directly. Undermine emotionally. There is a style of argument so elusive, so indirect, that it doesn't feel like an argument at all. You won't hear yelling. There won't be direct accusations. What you'll experience instead is an emotional undercurrent designed to destabilize you. Comments that chip away at your self-worth, moods that leave you guessing, subtle comparisons that make you feel inadequate. This is the art of emotional undermining. Rather than confront an issue head-on, the manipulator sidesteps confrontation and chooses psychological erosion. She may not say, "I'm disappointed in you," but she'll sigh when you walk into the room. She won't say you're not good enough, but she'll talk about how other men do things differently. She won't say she's angry, but she'll withdraw intimacy or give you just enough attention to keep you questioning what's wrong. Machiavelli famously said, "The lion cannot protect himself from traps, and the fox cannot defend himself from wolves." One must therefore be a fox to recognize traps, and a lion to frighten wolves. This tactic is the fox. It's not overt, it's not confrontational, It's clever, elusive, and hard to defend against because you can't fight what hasn't been said. You find yourself in a position where you're constantly trying to decode her moods. You ask, "Is something wrong?" And she replies, "I'm fine." But she's not. And you know it. Now you're chasing her emotional state, trying to fix something you can't define. This isn't accidental. It's a power move. By never arguing directly, she avoids accountability. You can't accuse her of attacking you because nothing explicit was said. But you feel it. You feel the shift, the chill, the passive comments, the silence. This keeps you in a constant state of self-doubt. Are you imagining things? Are you overreacting? And because she's not engaging directly, you're left to fill in the blanks with your own insecurities. That's the genius of it. You become your own manipulator. This tactic is especially effective on emotionally aware men who want to understand and connect. Men who don't respond to yelling but will overanalyze every sigh, every cold glance. She doesn't need to scream. She just needs to emotionally retreat or drop a few well-placed barbs. The rest you'll do to yourself. And when you finally snap, because emotional undermining builds up, you become the aggressor. You look unstable. She can then play the role of the calm victim while you unravel. It's the perfect trap. Machiavellian manipulation at its finest isn't loud. It's not obvious. It works because it hides behind ambiguity and lets you destroy yourself from the inside out. When someone refuses to argue directly but continues to punish emotionally, they're not seeking resolution. They're seeking dominance without ever having to raise their voice. Slowly erode your confidence. The most dangerous manipulations don't happen in dramatic, explosive moments. They happen slowly, incrementally, like a slow drip of water that eventually cracks stone. One of the most Machiavellian tactics in emotional power dynamics is the gradual erosion of another person's confidence. It's subtle, quiet, often imperceptible in the beginning. But over time, it leaves the target feeling smaller, weaker, and more dependent. This tactic doesn't begin with insults. It begins with small corrections. Harmless jokes, passive observations. The manipulator may say, "Are you sure you want to wear that?" Or, "You always get nervous around people, don't you?" These statements are wrapped in a tone of concern or even affection. But what they're really doing is introducing doubt, not aggressively, strategically. The key here is consistency. It's not the single comment that causes the damage. It's the pattern. Over weeks and months, the target begins to internalize these messages. Their decisions are second-guessed, their instincts questioned, and because the criticisms are so soft, so seemingly well-intentioned, they don't even realize it's happening. Machiavelli believed in dismantling rivals not through direct confrontation, but through tactics that left them unsure of their own footing. He wrote that it was better to conquer by strategy than by war. Eroding confidence follows this rule exactly. You undermine a person's sense of self without ever raising your voice. A skilled manipulator may also use comparisons. "My ex was really driven," they might say, or "I just admire people who push themselves." These aren't overt put-downs, but they set standards that the target is made to feel they fall short of. Slowly, the target begins to feel unworthy, not by being told so outright, but by implication. Another version of this tactic is overcorrection. Imagine someone shares a creative idea or expresses a desire. Instead of encouragement, they're met with technical nitpicking or vague criticism. "It's just not realistic," the manipulator might say, or "I don't think you've thought it through." Over time, this dulls the target's ambition. They start to self-edit before even speaking. And what happens next? dependence. A person whose confidence has been eroded begins to lean on the manipulator for guidance. They stop trusting themselves. They seek approval, validation, permission. They become easier to control, not because they're weak, but because they've been made to feel weak. It's also important to note how the manipulator disguises their influence. They may say, "I'm just being honest," or "I don't want you to get hurt." These statements reframe the manipulation as care. That confusion deepens the emotional trap. Now the target feels unsure and grateful for the support. Eventually, the target reaches a point where their self-image is no longer theirs. It's been chipped away and replaced with a distorted reflection, crafted not by truth, but by someone else's control. They still look in the mirror, but they no longer recognize the person staring back. Reinforce that you're not good enough. A classic and devastating psychological tactic is the reinforcement of inadequacy. It's not just about saying, "You're not good enough." It's about proving it over and over again through words, reactions, silence, and comparison. The Machiavellian manipulator plants the idea, then waters it until it grows into a permanent belief. This begins with the subtle undermining of your achievements. Let's say you're proud of something, an accomplishment at work, a personal breakthrough, a goal achieved. The manipulator responds with indifference or faint praise. "That's nice," they might say, "but it's not a big deal." Or worse, "A lot of people do that." This flattens your joy. It makes you question whether your success is real or just something you exaggerated in your own mind. Machiavelli taught that rulers should keep their subordinates in awe of them, not necessarily through fear, but through emotional imbalance. When a manipulator constantly downplays your worth, they raise their own by comparison. They become the benchmark of excellence, and you remain in pursuit. Another tactic is creating shifting standards. One day, you're not attractive enough. The next, you're too emotional. Then you're too cold. The target is constantly told they're missing some invisible mark. It keeps them off balance, always trying to measure up to a moving goalpost. No matter what they do, it's never enough. Worse still, the manipulator may use other people as silent weapons. "You should see how she handles things, so calm under pressure." Or, "My friend's partner never argues about this kind of stuff." These comparisons are strategic. They present fictional or real standards that are designed to make you feel subpar, inferior, or disposable. This conditioning slowly programs the target to believe that love, acceptance, and even basic attention are things to be earned, not freely given. The message is clear. You are not enough as you are. You must change, improve, and obey to be worthy of affection. That belief is toxic and effective. Even silence becomes a tool. A manipulator may withdraw emotionally when you express yourself, making you feel like your thoughts are annoying or inconvenient. Over time, you begin to suppress your voice. You censor your needs. You make yourself smaller just to avoid rejection. Eventually, you may begin repeating the manipulator's language to yourself. "I am overreacting. I do make things harder than they need to be." These internal monologues are the final phase of the manipulation, when you've fully internalized their criticism as your own truth. At this point, you're no longer just dealing with someone who questions your worth. You've become that person yourself. Reward compliance, punish strength. Few tactics are more corrosive to someone's identity than this one, rewarding them when they shrink and punishing them when they stand tall. This manipulation isn't about disagreement, it's about control. Specifically, control over who someone is allowed to be in a relationship. The Machiavellian operator knows that by training someone to associate peace with submission and conflict with self-expression, they can mold that person into a compliant, controllable version of themselves. This begins with pattern conditioning. When you agree with the manipulator, when you defer to their opinions, when you let things go for the sake of peace, you're rewarded with attention, affection, even praise. "I love how easy you are to talk to," they might say. "You're not like other people who always need to argue." But try asserting yourself, disagreeing, defending your boundaries. That's when the mask slips. Suddenly, you're too sensitive, aggressive, difficult, or overreacting. The love withdraws. The tension rises. The room grows cold. This isn't just a reaction. It's a punishment. You're being conditioned. Compliance earns comfort. Strength earns isolation. Over time, the target begins to adjust behavior. Not consciously at first, but instinctively. They avoid certain topics. They hold back their opinions. They let small injustices slide. Because each time they speak up, the cost feels too high. And each time they stay silent, they're rewarded with temporary harmony. This tactic is deeply Machiavellian because it transforms free will into trained behavior. You're no longer acting from your own values. You're reacting to invisible emotional incentives and punishments. It's a soft form of control, but a powerful one. The manipulator may even create illusions of empowerment. "You're free to say whatever you want," they insist. But the emotional fallout that follows any challenge proves otherwise. Over time, the target begins to police themselves, long before the manipulator ever needs to step in. What makes this tactic so damaging is that it targets a person's strength, their voice, their values, their autonomy, and teaches them that those traits are liabilities. It reframes power as a flaw, and in doing so, it turns strong individuals into subdued versions of themselves, just to maintain peace in the relationship. Machiavelli argued that successful rulers should break the spirit of rebellion before it can form. This is how it happens in the personal realm, not through force, not through overt domination, but through strategic emotional conditioning, making strength costly and submission rewarding. And the longer it continues, the more the target forgets what it ever felt like to stand tall without fear. Make your achievements feel small. One of the most corrosive manipulation tactics used in relationships, whether romantic, platonic, or professional, is minimizing someone's achievements. This strategy isn't loud or aggressive. It doesn't involve direct insults or obvious belittlement. Instead, it works through subtle, consistent undermining. A raised eyebrow, a delayed reaction, a lukewarm, "That's nice," when you expected excitement. Over time, it erodes your sense of accomplishment and worth. When someone downplays your achievements, they're not just being passive-aggressive, they're exercising control. Every time you succeed, it creates a moment where you could feel confident, proud, even independent. That's a threat to someone who wants emotional power over you. So instead of celebrating with you, they shrink the moment. They reframe your achievement as lucky, easy, or unimpressive. This tactic plays out in layers. Let's say you get a promotion. You come home excited, and the response is, "Wow, finally, took them long enough." Are you sure you're ready for all that responsibility? Well, it's not like it's CEO or anything. Nothing overtly cruel, just enough to make you question yourself. You feel the energy leak out of your moment. Instead of glowing, you're doubting. Instead of celebrating, you're second-guessing. That shift is exactly what the manipulator wants. Machiavelli, in The Prince, suggested rulers should weaken others' sense of power and autonomy to remain dominant. In personal dynamics, shrinking someone's victories achieves the same thing. If you can't feel good about your own progress without someone else's validation, you become emotionally dependent. Your self-worth shrinks to match the approval you don't receive, And it doesn't stop at professional wins. It happens with fitness goals, creative projects, personal growth. You lose weight. They comment that you're probably just stressed. You finish a creative project. They ask if anyone else liked it. You finally set a boundary. They imply you're being difficult. The brilliance of this tactic lies in its invisibility. It rarely looks like direct sabotage. Instead, it hides in the tone, the timing, the offhand remark. And if you call it out, it's easy for them to deny. I was just joking. You're taking it too seriously. You start wondering if you're the one overreacting. Over time, this wears down your confidence. You begin pre-filtering your wins. You might even stop sharing them altogether because you've been conditioned to expect indifference or dismissal. And when that happens, the manipulator wins. You stay small. You stay reachable. You stay dependent. Celebration is a form of emotional power when someone consistently robs you of that by making your achievements feel insignificant. They're not just being unkind. They're pulling the strings behind your self-esteem, making sure it never grows large enough to outgrow them. Make you dependent on her approval. This is a slow burn tactic, one of the most subtle and dangerous forms of control. It doesn't involve threats, ultimatums, or overt dominance. Instead, it creates an emotional ecosystem where your sense of self-worth becomes directly tied to one person's validation. When she approves, you feel alive. When she disapproves, you feel like you've failed, not just in the moment, but as a person. It often starts with overwhelming warmth, praise, affection, encouragement. You feel seen, supported, even adored. But soon that praise becomes selective. Approval is given for certain behaviors, but withdrawn or withheld when you deviate from expectations. And here's the trap. You start chasing it. Her approval becomes a drug, a reward, a goal you didn't know you signed up for. This dependency is cultivated over time, often through intermittent reinforcement. Sometimes you get praised for doing something minor. Other times you do something genuinely meaningful and get nothing. That inconsistency is what creates the addiction. You're always trying to figure out what will please her next. You stop trusting your internal compass and start living by hers. Machiavelli emphasized the importance of perception over truth. In this tactic, the truth is, your value isn't determined by another person's mood, but perception is everything. And when someone controls your emotional highs and lows through approval, they control your reality. Once this dynamic is in place, it alters your behavior. You might change how you dress, how you speak, even how you think, just to maintain that approval. You become hyper-aware of what she likes, what makes her smile, what triggers her disapproval. Your identity shifts to fit her preferences. This isn't love, it's emotional conditioning. And it's especially powerful when combined with guilt tactics. For example, if you assert yourself and she responds with cold silence, or sadness, or subtle disappointment, you'll likely fold. Why? Because you've been trained to believe her approval equals your goodness. The more this cycle repeats, the more power she gains. You'll stop doing things for yourself and start doing them for her reaction. The danger is that you lose your inner compass. You forget how to validate yourself without external feedback. You become a mirror reflecting her expectations. And when she knows this, she can shape you into anything she wants. Even worse, she can take it away at any time. That's the threat behind the curtain. If you displease her, you'll lose her approval, and with it, your sense of self. So you avoid confrontation. You suppress your needs. You tolerate things you wouldn't normally tolerate, all in the name of keeping the peace, or more accurately, keeping her praise. This isn't about mutual respect. It's about ownership of your emotional state. Once you rely on her approval to feel worthy, she owns a part of your identity. And that's when control becomes complete. Plant seeds of self-doubt. Self-doubt doesn't arrive in your mind like a storm. It creeps in like a whisper. And manipulators understand this better than most. One of the most effective ways to control someone emotionally is not through fear, force, or anger, but by slowly dismantling their confidence from the inside out. It's done through subtle, targeted remarks designed to make you question your own judgment, perception, and even memory. Planting seeds of self-doubt isn't about attacking someone head-on. It's about gently nudging them off balance, again and again, until they no longer trust themselves. The manipulator doesn't need to be right. They just need you to wonder if you're wrong. It might start with small things. Are you sure that's how it happened? I think you're overthinking it. You always get so emotional about this stuff. These statements are disguised as concern or observation, but the goal is destabilization. The more you hear them, the more you pause before speaking. The more you second-guess your instincts. You hesitate to make decisions. You check in with them before acting. Eventually, you begin to look to them for validation. Not because they're wiser, but because you've been trained to doubt your own voice. This is psychological erosion, and it's incredibly effective. Machiavelli would call this soft control, power that doesn't look like power. When you plant self-doubt in someone, you don't have to micromanage them. They start doing the work for you. They self-censor. They self-correct. They seek approval. You become their default authority because they no longer trust their own. This tactic is even more damaging when paired with occasional praise. Just when your confidence is completely shaken, the manipulator might lift you up. Now that's the version of you I like. This reaffirms that they, not you, are the judge of your value. You begin chasing that fleeting approval, always trying to recapture the version of yourself they briefly endorsed. Another layer of this tactic is gaslighting. If you bring up something that hurt you, they twist it. That never happened. You're remembering it wrong. You begin to mistrust not just your opinions, but your reality. You become emotionally lost, disconnected from your instincts. Once self-doubt takes root, it grows on its own. Even when the manipulator is silent, the seeds continue to sprout. You overthink texts. You apologize too often. You play conversations back in your head, wondering if you sounded stupid or needy or wrong. The genius of this tactic is that it creates a prison without walls. You don't need someone to constantly put you down if they've successfully made you doubt yourself. You'll do it for them. You'll keep yourself small. You'll stay quiet. You'll ask for permission to exist fully. And they'll sit back knowing they no longer have to control you because you're doing it yourself. Make you question your instincts. When someone begins to subtly chip away at your sense of inner knowing, your gut reactions, intuitive alarms, or natural emotional responses, they are engaging in one of the most powerful psychological tactics, instinct erosion. This is not direct control. It's not threats or ultimatums. It's the quiet war against your inner compass. Machiavelli taught that power is maintained not by brute force alone, but by shaping how people perceive reality. The most dangerous rulers were not the loudest. They were the ones who convinced their subjects that obedience was reason and rebellion was madness. In personal relationships, a similar tactic unfolds when your partner starts to challenge the very tools you use to interpret the world. You sense something is off. Maybe her tone changes, her stories don't line up, or her body language shifts. But when you express that feeling, she dismisses it. You're always overthinking things. Why do you always expect the worst? You're being paranoid. Each time, your instinct is not just questioned, it's framed as a flaw. Over time, this repeated message leads you to second-guess yourself. You don't just wonder if she's lying, you wonder if you're broken for even asking. You begin to outsource your reality to her. This is how manipulation goes from external to internalized. Instead of her needing to defend her actions, you start defending your reactions. You apologize for bringing up things that feel off. You stay silent when your gut says, speak. You begin to rely on her interpretation of events over your own. And that is the moment she has real control. By making you question your instincts, she removes your last line of defense, self-trust. A person who doesn't trust themselves becomes incredibly easy to manipulate. They rely on external validation, they tolerate contradictions, and they accept explanations that don't add up because they've been trained to believe their internal radar is broken. This tactic is not just emotionally abusive, it's identity-altering. Once you lose faith in your instincts, you lose confidence, boundaries, and eventually your autonomy. You become someone who watches red flags go up and still stays. Use loyalty to trap you, not honor you. Loyalty is one of the most powerful values in any relationship. It represents commitment, sacrifice, trust. But under the lens of manipulation, loyalty becomes a leash, not a virtue. It is no longer a shared bond. It becomes a one-sided obligation meant to hold you in place, even when things are unjust or toxic. Machiavelli believed loyalty was fragile and often transactional. He advised rulers to appear loyal while being free to break promises when power required it. In personal dynamics, this tactic emerges when someone demands unwavering allegiance from you while giving none in return, or worse, actively mistreating you. The manipulator wraps herself in the rhetoric of devotion. After everything we've been through, no one else would ever put up with you like I do. You're supposed to stick by me no matter what. The implication is clear. Loyalty is proof of love. And if you question her, challenge her, or even consider walking away, you're betraying something sacred. She builds a moral prison where your desire for integrity or fairness becomes a sin against the relationship. This tactic also reframes abuse as endurance. If you stay, you're loyal. If you leave, you're weak. She might praise your loyalty even as she disrespects you, because your willingness to endure becomes a source of her power. Over time, loyalty stops being a gift you offer and becomes a trap you can't escape. You may feel guilty for thinking about leaving, even if you're emotionally miserable. That guilt isn't organic, it's engineered. She has convinced you that leaving equals betrayal, and betrayal equals failure. This form of manipulation is especially effective on people who pride themselves on being committed. Your strength, your devotion, is turned against you. She creates an emotional contract that only you are obligated to uphold, and breaking it makes you feel like the villain, even when she's the one setting the fire. Present herself as your only emotional refuge. One of the most chilling tactics in long-term manipulation is the construction of emotional monopolies, the slow, calculated process of isolating someone from all other meaningful sources of support, then positioning oneself as the only place left to turn. Machiavelli urged rulers to keep their subjects dependent. A prince who provides the only means of survival will never be challenged. In relationships, this unfolds as emotional dependency. She becomes your sole source of comfort, validation, and belonging. It often starts subtly. She might suggest your friends don't really get you. She might discredit your family as toxic or untrustworthy. She may even react with jealousy or hurt when you connect too deeply with others. Slowly, your social world shrinks and she fills the vacuum. They don't understand you like I do. I'm the only one who really sees you. At first, it might feel flattering, even intimate, but as time goes on, the exclusivity turns suffocating. You begin to notice that you can't express your feelings outside of her without backlash or guilt. She may invalidate your outside relationships or question your loyalty for even trying. Now, when you're upset, overwhelmed, or in pain, You can't go to your friends. You hesitate to call your sister. You filter what you say to coworkers. She has become your only emotional outlet. And that gives her absolute psychological leverage. She can mistreat you, then be the only one to comfort you afterward. She can cause the wound and offer the bandage. And in that paradox, you become trapped, because you now believe no one else will understand you, help you, or even want you. This tactic turns her into both the source of the pain and the cure, making escape feel impossible. Even when the relationship becomes toxic, leaving feels like walking into emotional exile. Why? Because she's spent months or years convincing you she's the only place you'll ever be safe. Convince you this chaos is what love feels like. When intensity replaces intimacy, when volatility is mistaken for passion, and when emotional highs and lows are romanticized as signs of real love, you're in the grip of one of the most addictive manipulations, the normalization of chaos. Machiavelli taught that people are more easily ruled by fear and uncertainty than by peace. A predictable environment makes people question authority. A chaotic one makes them cling to whoever seems to offer stability, even if that person is the one causing the chaos in the first place. In relationships, this tactic plays out as a romantic narrative. She doesn't just accept the drama, she elevates it. We're just passionate. Our love is wild. Nobody understands what we have. Every fight becomes a test of devotion. Every reunion after conflict is celebrated as a deepening bond. The cycle of breakdown and makeup becomes the new normal. What's happening here is trauma bonding masked as intimacy. The pain becomes addictive because it's always followed by relief. It's like being on an emotional roller coaster. When the lows are devastating, even mediocre highs feel euphoric. And she ensures that the ride never stops. Over time, calmness feels boring. Peace feels unnatural. You find yourself craving the spikes of adrenaline, the dramatic text exchanges, the passionate reconciliations. But you're not experiencing love. You're experiencing emotional conditioning. The chaos becomes the proof. If you didn't care, you wouldn't fight like this. If she didn't love you, she wouldn't get so emotional. Logic dies. Emotional exhaustion sets in. But you stay because you've been trained to believe that love is supposed to hurt. This is one of the most toxic mind games because it rewrites your blueprint for love. Even if you leave, you carry the belief that emotional turbulence equals intimacy. And unless you detox from that programming, you'll repeat the pattern. She convinces you that this dysfunction is passion and that chaos is the cost of something real. But what she's really done is make you confuse pain for depth and dependency for love.